expand. Meng Hao sped along over the surface of the second landmass, moving so quickly that any observer would only be able to see a blur that left everything rumbling in its wake. Only he could see the sea of ghosts that surrounded him, endless numbers of them. They radiated obsession, madness, and at the same time reverence. He was like a king leading his armies across the lands. More and more ghosts flew in to join that army, until both land and sky were completely covered by them. The cold was so intense that everything above and below was freezing over. It was a majestic sight. He passed through the central part of the second land mass completely unobstructed, heading toward the border and the third land mass. His speed increased, and the freezing lands beneath him were like a shadow. Behind him, immortal Bai Wuchen was trembling inwardly. Meng Hao was like the blazing sun at noon, and was someone she actually had no desire to provoke. However, it was clear that he was working toward the same goal she was, and therefore, she had no choice but to attempt to stop him. She couldn't permit anyone to interfere with her opportunity to return home. Her eyes glittered with killing intent as she pushed herself faster and faster. Behind her was the sect leader, then Sha Jiudong and Jin Yunchen in his golden robe. The three of them flew single file through the air, muttering to themselves as they gazed at Bai Wuchen and Meng Hao up ahead. Rumbling sounds filled heaven and earth like the crackle of thunder. The ghost spun around him as he swept over the land, and when he reached the border, he didn't pause for even a moment. Countless piercing howls rose up as he charged out into the void toward the third land mass. Not too long after Meng Hao and the sea of ghosts passed into the third land mass, Bai Wuchen appeared, gnashing her teeth. She didn't pause either, summoning a mist that turned her blurry as she also flew out toward the third land mass. She was followed by the sect leader and the other two Peak 9 Essences paragons. They hesitated for a moment, but then unleashed various divine abilities to follow. By this point, it would be impossible for them not to have come to the conclusion that the goal of both Meng Hao and Bai Wuchen lay in the third land mass. As for what exactly that goal was and why it caused the two of them to be so focused, the sect leader and the others didn't know. It might be a bit more possible to rationalize Bai Wuchen's actions, but as for Meng Hao, he wasn't even the ninth paragon to begin with and had only been to this place once before. However, in that first time he visited, he had clearly discovered something new. Time passed. Meng Hao was in the lead, increasing his speed the entire time, surrounded by a sea of ghosts. Soon, he was speeding across the surface of the third land mass itself. He knew Bai Wuchen was behind him, but all he did was snort coldly and completely ignore her as he flew at top speed toward his target destination. As soon as Meng Hao began speeding in that particular direction, Bai Wuchen's pupils constricted. By now, she was certain that Meng Hao was indeed heading to the exact same position as her target. Damn it, she thought, her eyes flickering with killing intent. Gritting her teeth, she even drew on her longevity for more speed and power. She bit down on her tongue and spit up a mouthful of blood, transforming herself into a mist. That mist rapidly became a blood mist, which shot forward with increased speed and an intense, murderous aura. Almost immediately, the distance between her and Meng Hao was narrowed down dramatically. Then, she performed a teleportation and appeared directly ahead of Meng Hao. There, her eyes turned red as she shoved her hand out toward him. "Get back," she said, her voice ice cold. At the same time, she unleashed the power of her cultivation base, causing heaven-shaking, earth-shattering power to converge on her palm. The result was that the mist in front of her took the shape of a gigantic hand that crushed toward Meng Hao. Meng Hao's eyes were glacially cold. By now, he could tell that Bai Wuchen had ascertained his own goal in this place. Does that mean that she came to the necropolis with the same objective in mind? Even as he reached this point in his train of thought, he snorted coldly and led the ghosts in a charge toward the mist hand. They howled, causing everything to shake as they slammed into the hand. From a distance, it wasn't possible to see the ghosts, but it was possible to see the hand lurching to a halt, unable to get near Meng Hao. Then, it collapsed, and immortal Bai Wuchen's face fell. She quickly retreated, transforming into a mist that vanished from in front of the deadly attack of the sea of ghosts. Meng Hao turned his head to look at a seemingly empty spot in the air off in the distance, his eyes glittering with killing intent as he said, "Get in my way one more time, and I'll kill you no matter the price I have to pay." With that, he turned and flew away. It wasn't that he didn't want to kill Bai Wuchen. Unfortunately, her techniques were far stranger than the golden-robed Jin Yunchen's. There was something very dangerous about her, as far as Meng Hao could sense. Therefore, unless it was absolutely necessary, He didn't want to force her hand. After Meng Hao left, the mist reappeared in the spot where he had been looking, quickly transforming into the form of a woman. It was none other than immortal Bai Wuchen, her face pale, her expression unyielding. Unfortunately, she was running out of options. She could sense how Meng Hao seemed to be invincibly powerful, and in fact didn't even need to attack. He could have the ghosts do it for him. I've spent years in preparation. I've waited and waited. My chance is finally here. That second mirror shard belongs to me, and anyone who tries to fight me over it will die. Eyes gleaming with madness, she began to pant. Then she turned as the sect leader and the others approached. When she saw them, her eyes glittered, and her lips could be seen moving as she transmitted separate messages to all of them. "You're serious? What did you just say? That thing is real." The sect leader and the others all blurted responses at almost the same time. The first response came from the sect leader, who immediately began to breathe deeply, his eyes shining as he stared at immortal Bai Wuchen. The second response was from Sha Jiudong. A tremor ran through him, and he almost seemed to change into a different person as he stared at immortal Bai Wuchen. Although he concealed what he was feeling, his eyes were bloodshot, and he seemed to be profoundly shocked. The third response naturally came from Jin Yunshan, who began to pant, his expression one of complete disbelief. "You three will know shortly whether or not I'm telling the truth." With that, she waved her hand, causing 3 jade slips to fly out, each one of which contained different sets of information. The sect leader and the others all caught them. As soon as the jade slip landed in the sect leader's hand, he studied it, and then his face darkened. After a moment, he took a deep breath, and something like a struggle could be seen in his eyes. Then the jade slip faded away, and his expression became very grim. As for Sha Jiudong, when he finished looking at the jade slip, he didn't say a word. However, his eyes seemed more bloodshot than before, and even radiated a rapturous glow. Then there was Jin Yunshan, who gripped the jade slip so hard that veins popped out on his hand. "Fellow Taoists," Bai Wuchen said, "would the 3 of you please assist me? As for all those ghosts he's called, I have a way to neutralize them for 2 hours." Bai Wuchen looked expectantly at the 3 other paragons, certain that they would be moved by her offer. She had planned long and hard to get the mirror shard, and had spared no cost in her efforts. Originally, she had prepared those jade slips to prevent them from fighting with her over the mirror shard. But Meng Hao had changed everything, and she was now forced to do things a bit ahead of schedule. After finishing speaking, she clasped hands and bowed. Without waiting for a response from the other 3, she turned to leave. In her heart, she was completely and utterly convinced that they would agree to help her deal with Meng Hao. After she left, Sha Jiudong was the first to take to flight, his eyes bloodshot, his killing intent rising rapidly. The next was Jin Yunshan, veins still pulsing on his hand but face expressionless. Finally was the sect leader. He took a deep breath and the brightness in his eyes faded a bit. His expression turned cold and he murmured, "Please forgive me, fellow Taoist Meng." With that, his energy began to rise, and he flew in pursuit of the others. The group of 3 went with Bai Wuchen in pursuit of Meng Hao, who had already caught sight of the location which was his destination, not too far off in the distance. It was a desert, the sands of which were being whipped into a frenzy by a gusting wind. As he neared, Meng Hao took a deep breath, then waved both of his hands out in front of him, simultaneously unleashing divine will. As the countless ghosts began to spread out to lock the area down, the excitement and anticipation in Meng Hao's face grew. He waved his hand toward the desert and a boom echoed out. As everything shook, the sand began to churn, slowly gathering together to form a mountain. As the mountain took shape, the desert itself shrank. The sand mountain reached higher and higher into the sky, touching clouds. Soon, the desert was no more. Revealed in front of Meng Hao was a stretch of ruins which had been buried underneath the desert, and in the middle of those ruins was a lake. A closer inspection revealed that it was actually not a lake, but rather a jagged shard of a mirror. However, it was so huge that at first glance it actually looked like a lake. Meng Hao's heart began to pound at the sight of the mirror shard. He thought of the parrot, of the copper mirror, and of many other things. Taking a deep breath, he reached out and made a grasping motion. Chapter 1470, Copper Mirror Shard. Chapter 1471, Righteous Jin Yunshan. In almost the exact same instant that Meng Hao was reaching out to grab the mirror shard, rumbling sounds could be heard outside of the desert as Bai Wuchen, Sha Jiudong, the sect leader, and Jin Yunshan, 4 potentates of planet vast expanse, all attacked together. Their combined attack caused intense, rumbling pressure. This was not the power of one attack but numerous attacks combined. A mad tempest sprang up that, although it couldn't be said to be transcendent, it was very close. A slashing force like that wasn't capable of shaking the entire sea of ghosts, but it was so sharp that it could slice right through it. The combined attack of the four powerful experts was like a blade slicing through bamboo, pushing ever closer toward the desert area. Meng Hao ignored the rumbling sounds and slowly closed his hand. The mirror shard flew toward him, shrinking down at the same time until it was the size of a finger. It looked ordinary, like nothing special at all. However, it was possible to detect that this object far exceeded even the most precious of treasures. It held faint traces of the aura of transcendence. As soon as Meng Hao touched it, he could sense what were apparently faint pulses of sealing power on the mirror shard, causing him to smile thoughtfully. This mirror shard had numerous uses, and whoever acquired it would have to research it deeply to ascertain them, except for Meng Hao. To him, uses which could be determined by means of research were all incorrect as far as he was concerned. Only Meng Hao could use the mirror shard for its intended purpose. After all, the shard had once been part of the copper mirror, and that copper mirror recognized Meng Hao as its owner. Even though he had lost the mirror, and the parrot had erased its mind, that couldn't change one important fact. Meng Hao was the master of the copper mirror during this era. Neither heaven nor earth could change that. Meng Hao looked at the mirror shard, gathered his divine sense, and then performed an incantation gesture with his left hand, pushing down onto the shard. As he did, he forced a drop of blood out of the tip of his finger. When it merged into the mirror shard, his mind trembled, and he felt as if his consciousness were inside of the shard itself. Everything around him was rumbling. However, it was in this moment that he suddenly realized that there were certain fluctuations which he could sense, somewhere outside of the necropolis. They were very faint, but they were there. Meng Hao instantly recognized that they were the fluctuations of the copper mirror and the aura of the parrot. He shivered and began to breathe deeply. He tried to issue a calling, but the mirror shard wasn't powerful enough. A few tests all failed. Only one shard isn't enough. If I can collect all the shards, though, I will definitely be able to summon the mirror. His eyes shone with a bright light. Taking a deep breath, he ceased his attempts to call out to the copper mirror and instead looked around quietly. Gradually, his eyes began to shine brightly as he realized that within the starry sky of the vast expanse, there were 8 locations which all had auras that tugged at him. One of them was the copper mirror itself, which was the furthest away from him. It was so far that its specific location was difficult to determine. As for the other 7 locations, he could sense exactly where they were, even the ones which were far away. I found one of the mirror shards in the mountain and sea realm, he murmured. At that time, my cultivation base wasn't strong enough to detect the location of the other shards. Using his divine sense, he was able to stare directly at the closest of the mirror shards. 1. Meng Hao collected the other mirror shard in chapter 619. It was so close, he was almost right on top of it. No wonder she knew about the mirror shard, he thought. So that's how it is. She actually has one of the other shards. His eyes glittered brightly as he realized that the nearest of the other 7 mirror shards was right here on the 3rd landmass, within the Sea of Ghosts in the hands of Bai Wuchen. Almost in the same moment that he sent his divine sense into the mirror shard, rumbling sounds filled the air as 4 people appeared, shooting toward him like lightning. They attacked with full power, blasting through the Sea of Ghosts and appearing near the desert and Meng Hao. As Meng Hao turned around to face them, they saw the mirror shard in his hand. In the moment that Bai Wuchen realized what had occurred, her pupils constricted, and she shot toward him, energy surging. "Please don't take offense, 9th Paragon," the sect leader said with a sigh. Clasping hands, he began to stride forward. Sha Jiudong didn't say anything, and as for Jin Yunchen, those veins were still bulging out, and his face was expressionless. The sect leader was behind Bai Wuchen. Next to him was Sha Jiudong, and furthest in the back was Jin Yunchen. They were like 4 powerful arrows shooting toward Meng Hao. Meng Hao wasn't too surprised to see all of them attacking. If he were Bai Wuchen and was able to sense the mirror shard in the necropolis, then he would have made plenty of preparations, including a way to force the other Peak 9 Essences Paragons to help. "I'm not sure what you want these mirror shards for," he said coolly, "but I have to thank you for saving me the trouble of finding yours." His expression was the same as ever as he faced the 4 incoming Paragons. He waved his hand, causing the Sea of Ghosts to scream as they merged into a tempest that spread out to meet his 4 attackers. Earlier, the group of four had attacked and dispersed only one part of the Sea of Ghosts which had been blockading the area. Now, they were facing an attack from the combined power of all the ghosts, which was a force that was completely different than before. As the Sea of Ghosts surged toward them, icy coldness froze up everything in the area. But then, a bright glimmer appeared in Bai Wuchen's eyes. She grabbed out into the air and all of a sudden, her own mirror shard appeared in her hand. It was a bit bigger than the shard Meng Hao had acquired. As soon as it appeared, Bai Wuchen spit out some life force essence aura onto it, then raised it above her head. The mirror shard flickered brightly, shining with light that could shake heaven and earth. Everywhere it passed, the ghosts shivered, then suddenly stopped in place, blank expressions on their faces. In the blink of an eye, the light had swept about in all directions, causing all of the ghosts to stop moving. Blood sprayed out of Bai Wuchen's mouth. Obviously, using the mirror shard in that way came at a heavy price. However, a moment later, she was charging toward Meng Hao again. The sect leader began to stride forward silently, as did Sha Jiudong and Jin Yunchen. The entire group of four passed the motionless ghosts to head directly toward Meng Hao. It almost looked like a scene in which Meng Hao was the guardian of the third landmass, and these four were invaders who had entered the place after untold hardship, and were now attempting to kill Meng Hao to win their prize. "That's not how to use the copper mirror shard," Meng Hao said, his expression the same as ever. He looked up, clenching his right hand into a fist which he then punched out at immortal Bai Wuchen. He immediately resorted to the devil-butchering fist, which contained the embodiment of the god-slaying, self-immolation, and life-extermination fists within it. One massive fist strike shook heaven and earth, leaving everything trembling. A huge boom rang out, and immortal Bai Wuchen trembled. Blood oozed out of the corners of her mouth as she was shoved backward. However, Meng Hao was also forced back, his face flushed. As for Sha Jiudong, he transformed into a windstorm which then hurtled violently toward Meng Hao. Meng Hao snorted coldly, raising both hands up into the air. At the same time, he transformed into an azure rock which shot forward to meet Sha Jiudong. Massive booms echoed out as Sha Jiudong emerged from the sand, staggering backward several paces. Meng Hao also fell back, blood oozing out of his mouth. Then he looked up at the sect leader, who had mixed emotions on his face as he stabbed his finger toward Meng Hao's forehead. That finger attack was like the might of heaven, causing incredible pressure to weigh down. However, in that same moment, Meng Hao performed an incantation gesture with his right hand, unleashing the essence of the 8-hex space. Instantly, it was as if a separate world had been erected. The sect leader's finger clearly landed onto Meng Hao, and yet Meng Hao didn't move a muscle. In contrast, the sect leader flew backward, face flickering as he waved his sleeve. As he dodged the essence of space, he prepared to make another attack, when all of a sudden Jin Yunchen let out a piercing cry and shot violently toward Meng Hao. Everyone assumed that he was just about to attack Meng Hao, but then he suddenly spun in place. As he neared Meng Hao, he reached out toward the sect leader and then jerked his hands apart. It was none other than his heaven-ripping magic. A boom rang out, and the sect leader frowned. His hands flashed in a double-handed incantation gesture, causing powerful ripples to spread out in defense. The sudden change in the tide of battle was so startling that the sect leader had no choice but to suddenly back up. Sha Jiudong was also prevented from attacking, and immortal Bai Wuchen was taken completely off guard. "Jin Yunchen, are you crazy?" she roared in rage. What she had offered Jin Yunchen earlier was so incredible that she had been certain he would be incapable of resisting. 9 essences redistillation fruits might be rare in the vast expanse, Ju Yunhan said, and if you had actually pulled one out and handed it over, I might have been impressed. But you only offered a lead on how to get one. Your information might be completely accurate, and maybe I really could find that 9 essences redistillation fruit eventually, but I'm not that kind of person. I've always been righteous, and I already made an agreement with fellow Taoist Ming to cease hostilities. I take my promises seriously, so how could I possibly go back on my word? Jin Yunchen stuck his chin out, looking incredibly proud. The truth was, he was cursing inside. "Fool Bai Wuchen," he thought as he stood there next to Meng Hao. "Unless you're absolutely certain of being able to kill Meng Hao then, well fudge, considering his crazy personality, do you think he would ever let me get that 9 essences redistillation fruit? In the cultivation world, promises are the least trustworthy of all things. I don't know why the other two agreed with you. The sect leader has the vast expanse school and Sha Jiudong is stubborn. But I Jin Yunchen am not easily fooled." Immortal Bai Wuchen's countless machinations hadn't taken into consideration the indescribable level of fear Jin Yunchen, felt because of Meng Hao. Deep within his heart, he didn't possess even the shred of a desire to provoke Meng Hao the lunatic. It was as he had just said. If Bai Wuchen had actually offered him a 9 essences redistillation fruit, he would have helped her immediately. However, a mere piece of information, no matter how certain it was, could not make him do anything to offend Meng Hao. He had hesitated for a moment, a bit earlier. However, Meng Hao's complete and utter calm despite the sea of ghosts being taken out of action left Jin Yunchen in a dilemma. Gritting his teeth, he had trusted his intuition regarding Meng Hao and switched sides. Nobody, not even immortal Bai Wuchen, would have been able to guess that Meng Hao had frightened Jin Yunchen so deeply that he would do something like this. Meng Hao couldn't help but look over at him in surprise. Jin Yunchen looked askance at Meng Hao and said, "What are you looking at? Fellow Taoist Meng, don't tell me you think I'm the backstabbing type. We had our agreement to cease hostilities and my word is my bond. Nor will I flip out and lose my temper. When I say I'll do something, then I'll do it." He seemed quite proud, and he couldn't conceal the bit of derision that had seeped into his tone. Immortal Bai Wuchen's face darkened, and Sha Jiudong sighed. The sect leader smiled wryly as he looked at Jin Yunchen. Jin Yunchen cleared his throat as he continued to look over at Meng Hao. "Fellow Taoist Meng, if you need direct assistance from me, we can discuss the matter. For the time being, I won't get in the way of the other fellow Taoists." Jin Yunchen laughed heartily, then flew off to the side, acting as though he wouldn't get involved no matter what happened. He had chosen to switch sides, but there were different ways to switch sides. As long as he didn't help Meng Hao fight, then Bai Wuchen and the sect leader, and even Sha Jiudong, wouldn't be able to say anything. Because of the current situation, he was now vastly more important to Meng Hao than before, and might even be able to determine whether Meng Hao survived the catastrophe which had struck him. Of course, Meng Hao would have to pay a price for that. On the other hand, if Bai Wuchen wanted to avoid a complete failure in her plan, she would also need to pay a price. According to Jin Yunchen's calculations, things might even develop in such a way that he wouldn't help either side at all, but would still end up profiting from both sides. The best part of it all was that he would avoid doing anything whatsoever that Meng Hao might be offended by. Having reached these conclusions, Jin Yunchen smiled proudly. Immortal Bai Wuchen snorted coldly, ignoring Jin Yunchen and turning to the sect leader and Sha Jiudong. "Fellow Taoists, as for the promises I made, I can swear a Tao oath that they are true." As soon as the words left her mouth, the sect leader nodded and Sha Jiudong's eyes glittered with red light. The three of them then once again went on the offensive. They shot toward Meng Hao, Bai Wuchen in the lead, with the other two coming from the opposite sides, completely locking him down. Meng Hao's expression was calm as he looked at his three attackers. Even as they bore down on him, he pushed his hand out and numerous mountains began to descend. Even as the mountains blocked his three opponents, Meng Hao's hands flashed in a double-handed incantation gesture. The 8th hex appeared. Then the 7th and the 6th. They flew out in rapid succession. As Bai Wuchen and the other two dealt with the mountains, Meng Hao unleashed all of the hexes down to the first. 8 hexes combine, he said, eyes flashing. He performed an incantation gesture and then waved both hands out in front of him. Instantly, the 8 hexing magics combined, transforming into numerous threads which became a huge net. That net then shot toward the group of 3. The sect leader frowned, performing a double-handed incantation gesture that caused the sky to grow dark. At the same time, a shocking mountain peak appeared, descending from the heavens to hover above the sect leader's head. "Cauldron Mountain Conjury," he said in his ancient voice. Waving his hands, he caused the mountain to begin to grow rapidly until it seemed to supersede heaven and earth. At the same time, it shot directly toward Meng Hao. Meanwhile, Sha Jiudong began to spin in place, transforming into a raging sandstorm, inside of which could be seen a two-horned head. The head's eyes were crimson, and it let out a piercing shriek as it shot toward Meng Hao. Immortal Bai Wuchen's eyes flickered. Hands flashing with an incantation gesture, her essence power erupted out, causing all color in the world to be masked as fog billowed out. Boundless, endless fog turned the entire world into a place of fog that sought to bore into every pore in Meng Hao's body. 3 Peak 9 Essence's cultivators were all attacking simultaneously, a majestic sight that caused heaven and earth to shake violently. Meng Hao was powerful, but not even he was a match for 3 Peak 9 Essence's experts. Blood oozed out of the corners of his mouth as he staggered backward. Killing intent gleamed in Immortal Bai Wuchen's eyes as she suddenly reached out and performed an incantation gesture, causing a mirror shard to appear. The shard flickered dazzlingly, and a piercing beam of light suddenly shot out from it, stabbing through anything and everything as it headed toward Meng Hao. Rumbling echoed out, and simultaneously, Meng Hao teleported, retreating a significant distance, where he stared at them coldly. At the same time, Jin Yunqian powered up his cultivation base, as if to remind Meng Hao of his presence. As long as both sides were relatively evenly matched, it was to his advantage to remain just as he was. Meng Hao looked at him with an enigmatic smile, then turned away. From the beginning of the fight down to this moment, he hadn't shown the slightest sign of being ruffled, as if the battle was something he didn't even care about. I have to say that this is Meng Hao's first time fighting 3 Peak 9 Essences cultivators at one time, he said coolly, referring to himself by name for the first time. What a precious opportunity. He shook his head. But now, it's time to end this farce. He looked over at the sect leader, no killing intent in his gaze whatsoever. He could tell that the man was holding back. As for Sha Jiudong, however, he seemed to be attacking with as much madness at immortal Bai Wuchen, and yet there were clues within his magical techniques regarding his true attitude. Not even he wanted to push things to the extreme in this situation. Immortal Bai Wuchen laughed coldly. How arrogant! Let me tell you, if you don't hand over that mirror shard, you will die beyond the shadow of a doubt. Her right hand flashed with an incantation gesture, and the mirror shard glittered again. That's not how to use that mirror shard, Meng Hao said coolly. It was his second time saying such a thing. The first time, immortal Bai Wuchen hadn't paid attention, but to hear him say it a second time left her heart pounding. She wasn't the only one. Both the sect leader and Sha Jiudong were starting to wonder why Meng Hao was so calm when facing all 3 of them in battle. Even Jin Yunqian's heart was starting to pound. He waved his sleeve, and his own mirror shard appeared there in his hand. It floated up, radiating scintillating light, as if it were the most precious treasure in the entire world. Let me show you the correct way to use a shard from the copper mirror. Note from Deathblade. This chapter was a bit shorter than usual, coming in at around 1,400 words instead of the usual 2,000 or so. Chapter 1473, Because It's Mine. Meng Hao looked at his own mirror shard, his gaze somewhat tender as he recalled the copper mirror itself. He sent some divine will into the shard, and then, utilizing the same method he had used to control the copper mirror, caused a bright light to shine out of it that vastly exceeded the light from before. It was like a tiny sun there in his hand, and it completely eclipsed the light from the mirror shard held by immortal Bai Wuchen, becoming the most radiant thing in the entire world. All other light became darkness in comparison, colorless and black. Everyone who could see the mirror shard was completely shocked by what was happening. Bai Wuchen's eyes widened. After working with her mirror shard for so many years, she had come to understand some of its properties, and was profoundly aware that the brighter it shone, the more power and pressure it would unleash. Her heart began to pound, although on the outside she attempted to maintain a calm front. However, before she could do so for very long, she saw that, unexpectedly, the mirror shard that Meng Hao held in his hand was beginning to melt. What? Immortal Bai Wuchen's mind began to spin. What was happening exceeded even her powers of imagination. She could never have guessed that the mirror shard would actually melt. She continued to watch in amazement as the melted mirror shard fused into Meng Hao's right hand, spreading out to cover it, forming a gauntlet. It was pitch black and appeared to part of a set of armor. There was something threatening about it, and it virtually burst with an aura of manic violence. It was an aura that could shake heaven and earth, and at the same time, it seemed elated, as if it had been suppressed for countless years. Now that it could be out in the open, it was like a buried treasure which had finally been revealed to the light of day, to shine in all its glory. Bai Wuchen stared in shock, as Meng Hao's previous words continued to echo in her mind. Have I been using it wrong? She thought, her mind reeling. There was no time for her to contemplate how to react. Even as she prepared to steel herself and take action, her own mirror shard suddenly began to tremble, almost as if it were about to slip out of her control. This is impossible, she said, her face ashen. She had studied the mirror shard for countless years to figure out how to use it in the way she did, and had always assumed she was using it correctly. But now, after seeing Meng Hao turn his mirror shard into a gauntlet, her mind was in chaos. How? How did you? Before she could finish speaking, Meng Hao calmly waved his hand. Rumbling sounds echoed out as the mirror shard hovering around immortal Bai Wuchen, the mirror shard which she had possessed for countless years, suddenly began to shake. Then, It transformed into a beam of light as it severed its own connection to her and shot over to Meng Hao's side. "No," she screamed. It was like an invisible fist slamming into her. Her face went pale white and she coughed up a mouthful of blood. She simply couldn't accept what was happening. This was her precious treasure, her chance to return home, the object of all her hopes, something she had studied for years and years. In fact, in the past she had even been able to use the mirror shard to detect the presence of other mirror shards that were close by. But now, she found that everything she had come to understand about the shard had been mistaken. The feeling she was experiencing was like that of raising a child to adulthood, only to find out later that the child was not even related by blood. Then that child ran off with its true family. Bai Wuchen had even been able to sense the joy within the mirror shard, as if it were reuniting with a relative after years of wandering alone. "Why is this happening?" Bai Wuchen asked, glaring at Meng Hao with bloodshot eyes. Her hair was disheveled and she seemed to be slipping into a state of madness. Then she could only watch as her own mirror shard melted, merged into Meng Hao's arm, and became a vambrace that covered his entire arm. It was pitch black and radiated mysterious light, along with a shocking aura. Upon seeing the armor for the first time, Bai Wuchen, along with everyone else, was completely shaken. The vambrace was covered with complicated, abstruse designs and cloud-like patterns. Based on the shocking aura of the armor, it almost seemed as if Meng Hao's arm had somehow become connected to the world in some mysterious way. As all of this happened, the ghosts which had been immobilized began to awaken. As they lifted their heads and looked at Meng Hao, they saw the armor he was wearing and began to drop to their knees to kowtow. The world went silent. All eyes were fixed on Meng Hao, or more accurately, on the armor which covered his arm and hand. The sect leader took in a deep breath as he sensed the danger they were now in. Sha Jiudong's pupils constricted, and the madness in his eyes was fading into a bright glow. Only immortal Bai Wuchen seemed incapable of accepting the sudden turn of events. Moments ago, she had held the upper hand in the battle and had her mirror shard to rely on. But then, everything changed. It was at this point that Meng Hao answered Bai Wuchen's question. "Because it's mine," he murmured. He looked down at the armor and his gaze softened. The flicker of reminiscence could be seen in his eyes. When his words echoed out, Bai Wuchen heard them and a tremor ran through her. "That's impossible," she shrieked, breaking the calm silence that had filled the area. She couldn't accept what was happening, and as such, she lurched into motion, unleashing her cultivation base. The power of 9 essences exploded out, creating a mist that spread out to cover the entire world, then rumbled down toward Meng Hao. She refused to yield, not even at this point, not even when her mirror shard had been taken by Meng Hao. She would still risk everything. "Sect leader, fellow Taoist Sha, please help me one last time." Her tone was shrill, even pleading. The sect leader sighed, then stepped forward, transforming into a beam of light that shot through the essence mist created by Bai Wuchen. Then there was Sha Jiudong. He gritted his teeth, then began to spin in place, becoming a tempest that also merged into the mist. The shocking combination of all 3 of these powerful experts became a destructive attack that bore down on Meng Hao, causing everything in the area to quake violently. Meng Hao looked up, eyes flickering. His desire to fight suddenly skyrocketed, and he blurred into motion, appearing directly in front of the group of 3. Then he clenched his hand into a fist, whereupon cloud-like ripples began to spread out. The fist seemed slow, but apparently Bai Wuchen and the others simply couldn't dodge it. It was as if, the instant he punched out, the blow had already landed onto the essence mist. The mist rumbled as though a storm wind had blasted through it. It began to seethe and booms could be heard. The mist was swept away, evaporated, revealing Bai Wuchen, who coughed up a mouthful of blood. At the same time, Meng Hao took another step forward, unleashing another fist strike at the sect leader. He didn't actually strike the sect leader himself, but unleashed the power of the fist right in front of him. A boom could be heard, and a massive blast of wind surged out, causing the sect leader's face to flicker. At first he thought he might be able to use some divine abilities to fight back, but then he simply sighed with the realization that there was little to be done now. Instead, he took advantage of the force of the blow to fly backward, leaving the way open for Meng Hao. Meng Hao strode forward again, turning to look at Sha Jiudong in the sandstorm. Sha Jiudong chose to do the same as the sect leader and quietly backed up, sighing with the realization that he simply couldn't fight back. After the sect leader and Sha Jiudong retreated, Meng Hao appeared in front of immortal Bai Wuchen herself, and once again threw out a punch. Massive rumbling filled the air as the blow slammed into her torso. Cloud-like fluctuations emanated off of the armor, and Bai Wuchen coughed up a mouthful of blood, then tumbled backward like a kite with its string cut, cracking sounds filling the air the entire time. She was unable to stop at first, and coughed up more blood as she continued to fall back. Then, she finally came to a stop 3,000 meters away, where she looked up, face pale. Finally, she coughed up a third mouthful of blood. Her aura was in chaos, as though something inside of her was reversing her flow of qi and blood. She held nothing back in an attempt to control the force, but that only resulted in more blood oozing out of the corners of her mouth. The sect leader's eyes went wide, but he said nothing. Sha Jiudong subconsciously edged backward a bit, his eyes filled with shock. As for Jin Yunchen, he sucked in a deep breath, and couldn't help but think to himself that he really had made the right decision earlier. Like I said earlier, this farce is over, Meng Hao said coolly. He waved his sleeve, and the howling ghosts in the area began to swirl around him. They transformed into an invisible vortex which spread out in all directions, 50 kilometers, 500 kilometers, 5,000 kilometers, 50,000 kilometers, 500,000 kilometers. It eventually stretched out so far in every direction that it seemed endless. Meng Hao was in the very center, like a divine being within the world. The pressure radiating off of him exploded out, supplanting the pressure of heaven, covering the entire world. The Sea of Ghosts also emitted pressure, which combined with Meng Hao's, causing the ground to quake, as though the entire world, as if all heaven and earth, were prostrating in worship to Meng Hao. Jin Yunchen's face fell and he backed up, rotating his cultivation base. The sect leader sighed, clasped hands, and bowed to Meng Hao. Then he made a grasping motion, causing a bag of holding to appear, which he placed down onto the ground and then backed up. After retreating a certain distance, he rotated his cultivation base to protect himself from the intense pressure. Sha Jiudong also sighed, then produced a bag of holding, placed it onto the ground, and backed up. Their stance in the matter was clear. Not only had they held back earlier during the fight, they now also offered compensation. In their estimation, Meng Hao would not push the matter to the bitter end. Chapter 1474, A Long Path. They were correct. Meng Hao had his way of doing things, and after glancing at the sect leader and Sha Jiudong, he nodded slightly, waved his sleeve, and collected the 2 bags of holding. Then he looked over at Bai Wuchen. Her lips were still smeared with blood and her face was ashen. She stood there trembling, a bitter expression on her face as she looked, not at Meng Hao but off into the distance. Her mood couldn't be lower. She had been completely and utterly defeated. All of her plans, all of her preparations, were like nothing when it came to Meng Hao's spectacular power. Although she didn't want to admit it, she knew deep in her heart that what Meng Hao had said was no lie. The mirror shard really did belong to him. If it didn't, then the shard, which she had studied so deeply for so many years, would never have undergone the fantastic transformations it just had. She also understood even more deeply that her defeat had resulted in her losing not only the mirror shard, but her path home. I can't go back now, she murmured bitterly. Not unless I transcend. But transcendence is so difficult. I won't even be able to succeed with all 9 of the altars here in the necropolis. Even using Patriarch Vast Expanse's Tao altar might not work. The entire reason she had been able to coerce the sect leader into helping her was by offering him a clue about Patriarch Vast Expanse's Tao altar. She knew that because of the techniques she cultivated, transcendence would be especially difficult for her, far more difficult than it was for the average person. Most importantly, she had been waiting far longer than anyone else. She was one of the first people to descend to planet Vast Expanse from the Vast Expanse Society. She had been inside the starry sky of the Vast Expanse for far too long. She wanted to go back, to return home, to leave this place. The power of the mirror shard and the transcendent will it contained led her to the conclusion that it could cut open the vast expanse. Furthermore, the more mirror shards she could collect, the more likely it was that, even without a transcendent cultivation base, she could still leave the starry sky of the vast expanse. I just want to go home, she murmured bitterly. I just want to leave here to go back to my home outside the vast expanse. The sect leader stood there quietly, and Sha Jiudong sighed inwardly. Mixed emotions could be seen on Jin Yunchen's face. Outside the vast expanse, Meng Hao asked suddenly, looking over at her. What is outside of the vast expanse? A world like the starry sky inside? It was a question Meng Hao had pondered ever since his experience under the surface of the first land mass of the necropolis. In the visions he had experienced, he had gone outside of the vast expanse and had seen nothing but desolate emptiness. It was empty, devoid of life. There was nothing there except the 5 enormous pillars. 1. It really only hit me at the last minute that this conflicts with the original description in Chapter 1429, which also has ramifications on the information in 1428. Although it's theoretically possible to rationalize the discrepancy, I suspect it's a mistake on Jin's part. I don't have time to confirm that at the moment, so I'm going to put this on the list of things to analyze properly and or fix at a later date. There definitely hadn't been any vast expanse society. Back then, Meng Hao had begun to wonder if the supposed origin of the vast expanse school, the so-called vast expanse society, might be nothing more than a sham. In that case, perhaps the world outside of the vast expanse, the place where transcendent cultivators could go to, was also a sham. Outside the vast expanse is my home, Bai Wuchen said quietly. It's a flourishing place that the vast expanse can't even compare to. Outside, there is no mist, only a dazzling starry sky and one planet after another, filled with life. Immortal spirit aura is thick and abundant there. What we have here can't even compare. Here, we are like poor beggars. Although her words were simple as she spoke, her eyes shone brightly. In Meng Hao's mind, he could almost imagine the celestial utopia she described, and although it was completely different from what he had seen outside the vast expanse, his eyes glittered nonetheless. As he looked around, he realized that the sect leader, Sha Jiudong, and even Jin Yunchen all seemed to be lost in their memories, just like Bai Wuchen was. Meng Hao's scalp began to tingle. Inside of him was the remnant of the true ninth paragon soul, which he had long since soul-searched. At that time, he hadn't found any memories regarding what was outside the vast expanse. It was as if those memories were sealed and could not be accessed. What exactly is outside the vast expanse, he thought. Is it like Bai Wuchen described, or is it like what I saw? His eyes flickered as he once again looked over at immortal Bai Wuchen. Despite the fact that she had tried to kill him, she still cut a very lamentable figure. She wanted to return to her home, just like Meng Hao wanted to return to his. He sighed and looked away, transforming into a beam of light that shot off into the distance, accompanied by the ghosts. Meng Hao had accomplished his goal in coming to the necropolis. He had acquired the copper mirror shard. In fact, he had actually acquired 2 of them. There was now no reason for him to stay behind. He would leave the necropolis and return to planet Vast Expanse. Then he would follow the tug of the mirror shards he possessed to find the other 6. Once I find them, I can call out to the copper mirror and summon it back from wherever it is. The glow in his eyes shone brighter and brighter as he passed from the 3rd land mass into the 2nd, and then finally reached the 1st. He crossed the bridge of flesh and blood, went through the perimeter region, and finally stepped into the teleportation portal that was the exit. There, he stopped and looked back. As he gazed out at the distant 9th landmass, he could just barely make out that enormous throne and the blurry figure sitting upon it, who seemed to be looking at him. With that, he turned and stepped into the teleportation portal. After Meng Hao left, the sect leader and the others stood there silently for a moment, completely shaken. Having been defeated, Bai Wuchen's only hope of returning to her home now rested with transcendence. After revealing the information she had promised to the sect leader and Sha Jiudong, they proceeded to seek enlightenment on the transcendence daises of the 2nd and 3rd land masses. When the time came, they would seek to survive the apocalypse on the 3rd land mass using the turtle shell. The paths being tread were different, and thus the choices were also different. To Meng Hao, the transcendence daises in the necropolis were useless at the moment. Only after he successfully formed the 9th hex could he return, then try to make it to the 9th altar. Then, he could dispel the mists and use the power of the altar to combine the 9 hexes. As for the sect leader and the others, their cultivation bases were already at the pinnacle, which left them with only a single direction to follow: transcendence. It might be difficult, but as long as the slightest possibility of success remained, they would not give up. Back on the half-planet, Meng Hao stepped out of the teleportation portal, his hair floating around him. A thoughtful expression could be seen on his face as his 3rd eye closed, reverting into nothing more than a violet mark on his forehead. Then he flickered into motion, returning to his secluded meditation facilities in 9th Paragon City. There, he extended his right hand, causing the 2 mirror shards to float up in front of him. Next, he sent some divine sense into the shards, and was immediately able to sense 7 different locations in the starry sky of the vast expanse. One of them was the copper mirror, the position of which he couldn't lock down definitively. However, the other 6 locations were quite the opposite. He could determine exactly where they were. He tried summoning the copper mirror. While it was true that 2 mirror shards were more powerful than one, they still weren't powerful enough to succeed in that. he would definitely need more shards. My clone is already on the right track, he thought. The moment he enters the Tao realm, he'll be able to fully form the first of the 9 sealing marks. His clone's experience in the vast expanse shrine had actually changed Meng Hao's plans. However, he still wasn't completely certain about the matter, and needed to wait until the first sealing mark was complete before making a final decision. Since that's the case, there's no reason for me to stay here in the vast expanse school. Eyes flickering with bright light, he decided to leave. He would journey into the starry sky and follow the pull of the copper mirror shards to collect the remaining 6. A long, long path, he thought. He could sense that the 6 mirror shards were scattered in a variety of locations throughout the starry sky of the vast expanse, and that it wouldn't be easy to gather them together. It wasn't something that could be accomplished in a short amount of time either. After a moment of thought, a profound look could be seen in his eyes. He sent out some divine will, which was immediately detected by his subordinates, the 7 essences and 8 essences paragons. Meng Hao wasn't sure how long he would be gone, and there were many responsibilities to be handled while he was gone, including matters regarding the expansion of the 9th sect, as well as things pertaining to his clone. After making the relevant explanations and arrangements, he left. A beam of light shot up, leaving the lands below, leaving planet vast expanse and entering the starry sky. There he looked out at the vast expanse, his eyes flickering. Based on the tug he felt, he headed in the direction of the nearest mirror shard. Before, it would have been very, very difficult for Meng Hao to attempt to track down all of the mirror shards. However, his cultivation base was now strong enough to fight with the peak of 9 essences, and he also had 2 mirror shards that could transform into armor. With all that, he was confident that, other than a transcendent cultivator, it would be easier to find a phoenix feather or a Kilin horn than to find someone who could cause problems for him in a fight. As his true self was leaving, his clone was sitting cross-legged in the 9th sect. After taking first place in the vast expanse shrine, he had been named the legacy disciple of the 9th sect, and was given a mountain peak which was superior in all terms, including the view and the amount of spiritual energy. The entire mountain belonged to Meng Hao, and was protected by numerous restrictive spell formations. No one could possibly enter without his permission. Other than Meng Hao and Yanner, the only people on the mountain were various servant cultivators who had been assigned to work for him. Meng Hao's performance in the 9th sect's vast expanse shrine, and the matter with the 10th heaven, had already become somewhat of a legend. Furthermore, all of the disciples of the 9th sect had come to view him with complete awe and reverence. Even all of the chosen felt that way. In the few days which followed the event, a constant stream of visitors came to pay respects. At first he met them individually, but soon there were simply too many, and he finally announced that he would be going into secluded meditation to restore his cultivation base. After that, he entrusted outside affairs to Yanner. Yanner had no option other than to accept the arrangement. In the following days, all her time was taken up with receiving visitors from the sect. At first she was excited about the matter. After all, Fang Mu's rise to prominence meant that she instantly had a completely different status in the sect. Now she understood what it was like to be extremely popular. She also was able to accept countless gifts, so many that they couldn't fit into a single bag of holding. However, her mood gradually soured as she realized that the majority of people coming to visit her master were female cultivators. Furthermore, it seemed like each one was prettier than the last, and all of them were making discreet inquiries about her master. Chapter 1475, Marriage Alliance. A bunch of fawning sycophant, she thought. HMPH, I can't believe so many girls like my master, that old fogey. As his disciple, I definitely have to keep things under control. Yanner took her mission very seriously. She was often less than polite to the female disciples. She would accept their gifts, but when it came to their veiled inquiries about her master, she didn't even respond. The more charming and pretty the girls were, the more hostile Yanner got. Oftentimes, after such a female cultivator left, she would look miserably down at her own body, and even stare at her face in the mirror. Then she would stamp her foot and stalk over to Meng Hao's secluded meditation facilities to yell at him from outside. It was on one particular day that she stood there, fists on her waist, cursing Meng Hao. "Master, why don't you act like the old man you are? Look at you. Don't you have anything better to do than challenge the vast expanse shrine? Do you know how many manly visitors you've had recently, all throwing themselves at you? Well, do you?" Meng Hao opened his eyes, looked out at the infuriated Yanner, and smiled, somewhat curious about what she had just said. "Manly? Yeah, manly women. Stout and sturdy, each and every one of them all pimply-faced too. Women are supposed to have lovely voices, right? But not them. If you want, I can bring them all over to see you here. With that, she glared at the door of the meditation chamber. If Meng Hao dared to agree to such an offer, she would probably bite his head off like a vicious tiger. A strange expression could be seen on Meng Hao's face. Clearing his throat, he yelled, "Get back to cultivating. I've taught you a lot of divine abilities and Taoist magics. There's the Tao of reincarnation, the heaven god magic, and the mountain-consuming incantation. You never got them down right, so stop wasting time and get to work, all right." Then he closed his eyes and went back to meditating. Yanner snorted dramatically. Seeing that her master was just going to continue on with cultivation, she stamped her feet and glared at the door one more time, then turned and walked away. Bad master, stinky master, crotchety old fogey, shameless fossil, HMPH, mountain-consuming incantation, heaven god magic, Tao of reincarnation, I mastered all of those a long time ago. He's just coming up with excuses. As she muttered to herself, she walked past the mastiff, who was sleeping just outside of the courtyard. When the mastiff heard her muttering, it opened its eyes, listened for a moment, then quickly closed its eyes and pretended to continue sleeping. Time passed. Eventually, the number of disciples coming to visit began to decline. Just when Yanner was about to breathe a sigh of relief, though, people from cultivator clans outside of the vast expanse school started to show up. There were quite a few of them, many of whom offered gifts in the form of beautiful servant girls. Yanner was about to go mad, even more so than before. Most intolerable was that, unexpectedly, there were some people who came to propose marriage alliances. On one particular day, the Seven Essences Paragon who had helped Meng Hao during his tribulation brought a group of people to Meng Hao's mountain peak. Among that group was another Seven Essences Paragon. As the two paragons chatted, they were followed closely by a young woman. She carried herself gracefully and was spectacularly beautiful. Although she had a somewhat arrogant look to her, she didn't seem too pleased to be here. However, she followed along as the two paragons led her up the mountain. "Yanner, hurry and call your master out," said the ninth sect paragon, smiling. To him, Meng Hao was a very important person, and since Yanner was his disciple, it was only natural that he speak respectfully to her. Yanner wasn't too pleased with the situation. She looked at the two paragons, then the young woman, and her heart began to pound. Of all the women she had seen recently, this girl was definitely the most beautiful. Furthermore, her cultivation base was extraordinary, being in the early ancient realm. For some reason, Yanner started getting nervous. She nodded and ran over to Meng Hao's secluded meditation facilities, only to find that he had already emerged. If anyone else had come to visit, he would have refused to see them, but this particular paragon had been of significant help during his tribulation, and he definitely couldn't refuse him. Taking Yanner with him, he headed to the audience hall, where the ninth sect paragon laughed heartily upon catching sight of him. "Fang Mu, please offer formal greetings to Paragon Streamcloud from the third sect." The paragon from the third sect looked closely at Meng Hao, obviously measuring him up. Then he smiled. Meng Hao's expression was the same as ever as he clasped hands and bowed. After all the introductions were made, everyone sat down and began to chat. The beautiful young woman occasionally looked over at Meng Hao, her expression one of contempt, although she did a fairly good job of covering it up. Yanner sat next to Meng Hao, her dislike for the young woman growing by the moment. Then she heard the visiting paragon explain that this girl was one of the vast expanse school's holy daughter designates, and that he wanted her and Meng Hao to become Taoist partners. Yanner couldn't control herself. Her mind spinning, she subconsciously blurted, "No way, my master doesn't need a Taoist partner." As soon as the words left her mouth, she suddenly shivered and her face drained of blood. She looked over at Meng Hao and immediately dropped to her knees to kowtow, heart filled with regret. She had no idea why she had suddenly blurted what she had, and was suddenly very nervous that she might have angered her master. "Master, my mistake." The ninth sect paragon frowned, but before he could say anything, Paragon Streamcloud snorted and his eyes turned cold. As for the holy daughter designate, the scorn in her eyes deepened. Meng Hao's expression was the same as ever. The arrival of these two paragons hadn't ruffled him at all, and as for the matter of Taoist partnership, it was nothing surprising. His clone was incredibly famous in the vast expanse school, and was considered a chosen among chosen, the future pillar of the sect. It was to be expected that people would propose marriage alliances and Taoist partnerships. However, after hearing Yanner's reaction, he couldn't hold back from smiling. He looked over at her, his expression warm, then flicked his sleeve to indicate that she should cease kowtowing. "What mistake?" he said softly. "I never said you made any mistake." When she saw the kindness in his gaze, her heart shivered and strange, warm emotions suddenly flooded through her. With that, Meng Hao turned to the two paragons, clasped hands and said, "Seniors, I'm indebted to you for the kindness you've shown. Truly, I'm very touched. However, I, Fang Mu, truly have no need of a Taoist partner." The ninth sect paragon frowned and looked over at Meng Hao. However, he could tell that his mind had been made up, and the paragon had no desire to try to force the sect's most important chosen to do anything. Then he looked over at Yanner and recalled the warmth in Meng Hao's gaze, and suddenly everything clicked. A strange expression appeared on his face. Paragon Streamcloud's expression was very grim. He, Paragon Streamcloud, had already shown plenty of respect to this Fang Mu, and besides that, the young woman he had brought from his clan was a peerless beauty. Despite all that, Fang Mu unexpectedly refused the offer. Pressure instantly began to weigh down in the room. Meng Hao's expression was the same as ever, but Yanner looked frightened. With a cold snort, Paragon Streamcloud turned and clasped hands to the ninth sect paragon. Then he flicked his sleeve and turned to leave. As for the young woman, she ceased any attempt to conceal the scorn on her face. As she turned to leave, her expression was one of disdain. Just as she was about to walk out the door, she looked back and muttered, "Illicit master and apprentice romance. How utterly disgusting." Note from Deathblade. This is another relatively short chapter, coming in at about 1,400 words instead of the usual 2,000. Chapter 1476, of course. The words illicit master and apprentice romance immediately caused Yanner to shiver. Her face was completely ashen as she staggered backward a few steps. The second half of what the young woman had said, utterly disgusting, was like a hammer blow to the pit of Yanner's stomach. Her mind was reeling. It was as if her most secret and hidden feelings had suddenly been dramatically revealed to everyone, as though things which had confused even her were now being proclaimed loudly for everyone to hear. It made Yanner feel as if heaven and earth were suddenly spinning in reverse. She even coughed up a mouthful of blood. "You," she said, her vision swimming as she visibly shook. She simply didn't know what to say. In the instant that the words left the young woman's mouth, a grim expression overtook Meng Hao's face. He rose to his feet, and suddenly, incredible pressure exploded out, engulfing the young woman. At the same time, Meng Hao took a step forward. When his foot landed, lands shook and mountains were rocked. The Holy Daughter Designate's face fell. She had assumed Meng Hao was a soft and warm person, but in the blink of an eye he had become like a vicious wild beast. His gaze, his energy, the pressure radiating off of him, made her feel as if she were about to be torn to pieces. Instantly, she began to tremble inwardly, and her scalp felt as if it would explode. Paragon Streamcloud also frowned, and extended his hand as if to block Meng Hao's way. However, in that exact moment, Meng Hao looked over at him and said, "Do you truly dare to block my way?" One gaze and one sentence from the mouth of an ancient realm cultivator was being used to threaten a seven essences paragon. Anyone who saw this happening would find it inconceivable. It was an act of utter conceit, of complete audacity. It was like a praying mantis trying to stop a war chariot. However, in that instant in which Meng Hao looked at him, Paragon Streamcloud felt something strange and mysterious rumbling inside his mind. It was something threatening, although it wasn't coming from Meng Hao's cultivation base. He felt a sensation of deadly crisis that caused all the hair on his body to stand on end, as though Meng Hao's gaze contained some mysterious, unfathomable power. It was the kind of power that one felt when one's superior was staring you in the eye. It was very natural, completely lacking pretense and affectation, as though the person staring at him truly was the most powerful of experts. Even Streamcloud, a seven essences paragon, felt like a weakling. Even as his mind was sent reeling by a single glance, Meng Hao's words entered his ears. They should be words that could be considered the biggest joke in the world. And yet, although Streamcloud got the feeling that this person was completely mad, he also felt thoroughly shaken. How is this even possible? He thought. His mind was in chaos, and he felt so ashamed he was about to fly into a rage. Anyone with his position would feel the same way in such circumstances. However, even as his eyes flickered with coldness and he prepared to do something to Meng Hao, the ninth sect's seven essences paragon snorted coldly and stepped forward to block his path. A boom rang out, and the two of them backed away from each other. The ninth sect's paragon then spoke in a coldly sinister voice that echoed out in all directions. "Fellow Taoist Streamcloud, what exactly did this disciple of your third sect mean just now? We're in the ninth sect at the moment, so you had better be prepared to give us a good explanation." The ninth sex paragon was infuriated. The fact that no marriage alliance had been formed didn't really matter. This disciple couldn't possibly have said what she had said by accident. It was clearly an intentional insult. Whether or not what she said was true, Fang Mu had an illustrious name and position, yet she had openly condemned him, and had used vile and biting words to do so. The ninth sect paragon's heart burned with rage, and he bitterly regretted taking the initiative to invite Paragon Streamcloud for a visit. Meanwhile, Meng Hao looked away from Paragon Streamcloud and strode up to the Holy Daughter Designate, who was edging backward. The pressure weighing down on her only continued to grow more intense. With a muffled squeak, she began performing an incantation gesture to try to defend herself. As for Meng Hao, his face was extremely grim as he reached his hand back and slapped the girl across the face. A smacking sound rang out, and the girl screamed. A huge welt rose up on her cheek, and she even flew off the ground from the force of the blow. Before she could land, Meng Hao's fury at her insult caused him to unleash another slap. Another smacking sound rang out from the other side of the girl's face. Blood sprayed out of her mouth, and she screamed again. By now her face was in a sorry state and completely spattered in blood. "Get the hell out of here now," he roared, eyes flickering with killing intent. Despite how vile the young woman's words were, with his true self out of the sect, Meng Hao knew that if he killed her, it would start a war between the third and ninth sects. However, it wouldn't do to just let things drop, so even as the words left his mouth, he crushed the young woman's Dao heart, planting a seed of fear inside of her. Paragon Streamcloud tried to stop it from happening, but the ninth sect paragon prevented him. Their clash caused a huge boom to echo out, after which the ninth sect paragon's face turned very grim, and he echoed Meng Hao's words. "Get the hell out of here now." The ninth sect's power had been rising ever since Meng Hao became the ninth paragon, and its forces were tougher. A cold gleam could be seen in the eyes of the ninth sect paragon, and he followed up with, "If I hear any word of this spreading, or hear about you defaming the name of the ninth sect's killing son, then our two sects will definitely be having a war." Paragon Streamcloud could merely chuckle coldly. There was little else to say, considering that everything that had just occurred resulted from an insult on the part of his own clan member. Glaring spitefully at the young woman, he grabbed her and then shot off in a beam of prismatic light. After they were gone, things were peaceful and quiet again. The seven essences paragon hesitated for a moment, smiling wryly at Meng Hao. Then he looked over at Yanner, who stood there head bowed, speechless. After a moment of thought, he looked back at Meng Hao and said, "Fang Mu, you have an apprentice with a lot of latent potential there. You know, in all my years of cultivation, I've never had my own personal disciple. What do you say if I take the girl as my apprentice?" His words caused Yanner to shiver. Meng Hao shook his head, his gaze resolute. "Many thanks for your good intentions, Paragon." The Paragon looked at Meng Hao and sighed inwardly. Without another word, he turned and left. Mountain Peak was very quiet now except for the whispering of the wind. Meng Hao walked over to Yanner and bopped her head. "Expression warm," he said. "Why are you so upset? She ran her mouth and so I slapped her a couple times. It's over now. My murderous aura crushed her Dao heart, and she won't ever dare to make irresponsible remarks ever again. If you still feel like venting, then focus on your cultivation, and you'll be able to go take care of her yourself one day." Yanner bowed her head. Placing her hands on her cheeks, she looked up at him through fluttering eyelashes, embarrassed and unsure of what exactly to say. "Master, She knew that she should say something, she just couldn't find the words. Meng Hao smiled and bopped her on the head again. All right. Why don't you go prepare some spirit fruit? Master is getting a bit hungry." Then he headed back toward his secluded meditation facilities. Yanner stood there for a moment, a blank expression on her face. Finally, she stamped her foot. Rubbing the sore spot where he had bopped her head, she hurried off to prepare some spirit fruit. Before long, dusk had fallen. Gradually, the light faded from the sky and the moon rose. Moonlight flowed across the landscape like water, and although everything looked like it usually did, there was a lonely beauty to it that usually wasn't seen. Yanner had just arrived at Meng Hao's secluded meditation facilities. When she placed the spirit fruit in front of him, he opened his eyes and smiled at her. Seeing the confused blankness in her expression, he couldn't help but sigh. "Yanner," he said softly. She seemed to be in such a daze that she didn't even hear him. "Yanner," he repeated, even louder this time. "Huh," she replied, looking up at him. He sighed again. After a moment of silence, he stood and walked to the doorway, where he looked up at the night sky and the moon. "Yanner," he said softly, "do you remember when you were young and I brought you here to the sect?" I remember, she said, recalling the scene. She remembered that back then she had suspected her master of being a fraud, a belief that had persisted for some time even after arriving in the sect. Now that she thought back to the matter, she couldn't help but smile. As the moonlight fell upon her young face, she seemed even more beautiful than ever. Meng Hao looked at her and then said, "Master is going to tell you a story." His gaze was soft and seemed to contain many memories, memories from a time long before young Yanner had even been alive. That was because he was about to tell her a story that came from far, far back in the stream of time. Once upon a time, there was a place called the Mountain and Sea Realm, where there was a heavenly body known as Planet South Heaven. On Planet South Heaven, there was a place called Mount Daqing. That young man joined the Reliance sect and met a chosen there named Wang Tengfei. And that was the first time he ever saw her. At that time, she was Wang Tengfei's fiancée. That rock was so huge that when it flew, it filled the sky. It created a huge windstorm that swept her up along with him. They ended up inside a forbidden volcano together. In the Violet Fate sect, they became fellow disciples. On the day he got married, she stood next to his wife looking at him, thinking that he didn't notice her. Later, she left with her master Pill Demon and went to the Kunlun Society. In the windswept realm, she damaged her own soul to help him. She paid the ultimate price and yet had no regrets. He came to the Kunlun Society and saw her corpse. Then he used a timeshift magic to find her soul. On that day, his heart broke. He searched for her in the 8th mountain and sea but was unable to find her. However, he knew that he owed her the debt of a lifetime. Meng Hao told Yanner the entire story. It took a long, long time. He spoke through the entire night, and it wasn't until the sun began to rise that he finally finished. At the beginning, Yanner listened a bit absent-mindedly, but the longer the story went on, the more pain she felt inside, although she wasn't sure why. It was as if there was something slowly awakening in her heart. When Meng Hao finished the story, she simply sat there with a blank expression on her face. A long time passed. Then she looked up and quietly asked, "Master, what was the name of the girl in the story?" Meng Hao looked off into the sunrise and replied, "Her name was Chu Yuyan." "Is there more to the story?" Yanner asked. Meng Hao sat there quietly for a moment, then nodded. "Do you want to hear it?" Yanner shivered and didn't say anything for a while. However, the confusion gradually faded from her eyes. Soon she looked like she always did, simple and carefree. She finally turned back to him and shook her head. "I don't want to hear it now, but one day, if I do want to hear the rest of the story, will you tell it to me, Master?" "Of course." Chapter 1477, Provoking the Ninth Sect. In the starry sky some distance away from planet Vast Expanse were 3 spinning vortexes. They maintained their position there, fixed for all eternity, radiating pulses of mysterious light. The pulses of light were primarily dim and gray, as if they represented an aura of death. However, occasionally one could see radiant flashes of brightness meandering between the 3 vortexes. Meng Hao's true self hovered outside of the 3 vortexes, hair floating about him. He was minuscule in size compared to them, and yet his energy was mighty enough that he could stand as their equal. In fact, the vortexes even vibrated with hostility. According to what Meng Hao could sense, this was one of the locations that housed a copper mirror shard. He opened his third eye, and instantly the fog that made up the vortexes was lifted, revealing the true nature of what was beneath. He saw that inside the 3 vortexes were 3 worlds. There were no cultivators, only dangerous, deadly terrain, and numerous beasts the likes of which he had never seen before. There were also a few extremely brutal auras which were comparable to the 9 essences level. The most shocking and powerful fluctuations came from the second portal. Some sort of ancient entity inside, the master of the place, who was at the peak of 9 essences. Closer examination revealed the source of those fluctuations. It was an enormous, planet-sized, basilisk lizard. All of the lands of that world apparently existed on the surface of that basilisk, and according to what Meng Hao could sense, the copper mirror shard was inside its body. His eyes glittered as he transformed into a beam of light that shot directly toward the giant basilisk in the second vortex. Moments later, shocking booms echoed out into the starry sky. Meanwhile, back on planet Vast Expanse, Meng Hao's clone was once again deep in secluded meditation. Yanner was back to her old self, with no confusion or blankness because of what had occurred. She was as lively and energetic as ever, and continued to reject all of the female disciples who came to meet her master. However, when she was alone at night, she would look up at the moon and think about the story her master had told her about Chu Yuyan. The story stirred her heart, and gradually was causing a resonance to form with her past life. Time passed. Meng Hao's clone received fewer and fewer visitors, finally giving Yanner some time to practice cultivation. However, the fact that Meng Hao was the first person to summon the 10th heaven in the vast expanse shrine incited challenges from the chosen of the other sects. Their method of issuing their challenge was simple. Instead of going to the vast expanse shrines in their own sects, they came to the 9th sect. In the vast expanse school, there was no rule preventing disciples from doing that. In fact, such things had occurred before in the past. However, it wasn't common, and usually only happened under special circumstances. After all, challenging the vast expanse shrine in a rival sect was like knocking on someone's door and then kicking them in the shin. It was essentially a blatant provocation. However, the fact that Meng Hao had summoned the 10th heaven instigated a huge stir. The chosen who qualified to be in the top 10 in all the other sects were only able to maintain their silence for a short time before exploding into action. Then, they marched into the 9th landmass to challenge the 9th sect's vast expanse shrine. From the very first day, the sound of bells began to ring out. Virtually every day following that, the same thing occurred. The bell toll of the vast expanse shrine filled the air. The chosen from the other 8 sects took turns. It started with the 3rd sect, who sent 8 people over. Each one of those 8 fought their way into the top 100, and 2 of them made it into the top 10. The highest spot attained was only 4th place, but that was still in the top 10. Next came the people from the 4th sect, then the 2nd sect and the 5th. The result of having the chosen from all those other sects challenge the 9th sect's vast expanse shrine was that of the top 30 spots. Only 6 were held by disciples of the 9th sect. But then the 6th sect came, after which the 7th and 8th sects arrived. Then those 6 spots became 5. The situation was still somewhat tolerable, but then the 1st sect came, hell-bent on coming out on top. After their efforts, only 4 spots within the top 30 belonged to the 9th sect. In addition to that, numerous heavens were summoned. Although no one summoned the 10th heaven, only the 6th, it was still a shocking development. Of course, no one was able to take the 1st place spot from Meng Hao, but directly beneath him in the top 30 were numerous powerful experts from other sects. To the disciples of the 9th sect, it was a great humiliation, almost as if their sect were being trampled beneath the feet of others. It all led to quite an uproar. There were many arguments, and soon anger boiled over to the point that small-scale conflicts erupted. However, the overall situation couldn't be changed. Chosen from the other 8 sects didn't seem to care at all about their own vast expanse shrines, and were instead obsessed with challenging the one in the 9th sect. Gradually, months went by. Roughly 900 of the top 1,000 spots in the 9th sect came to be occupied by disciples from other sects. The 9th sect was left with only about 100 spots. The sect itself was powerless to do anything to stop the situation, short of physically preventing the other chosen from coming. However, if they did that, it would seem like they were nervous, even fearful of the challenges being issued by the other sects chosen. Considering how powerful the 9th sect was at the moment, they would never deign do that. The chosen of the 9th sect wouldn't agree to something like that. They had their pride after all. Because of the challenges from the other chosen, and the fact that their spots on the vast expanse shrine were continuing to shrink, the 9th sect slipped into a state of frenzy. Virtually all of the chosen, and even the ordinary disciples, went all out in their practice of cultivation. They took more outside missions and participated in more trials by fire. Only by increasing the levels of their cultivation base could they earn higher spots. As they grew stronger, it was without hesitation that they went on to re-challenge their own vast expanse shrine. It was as if all of the chosen in the entire vast expanse school had picked the vast expanse shrine in the 9th sect to be their joint trial by fire. Only by having their names on that list could they be truly illustrious. The trend didn't stop. A year later, the battleground among chosen expanded to include the top 2,000 spots. After another year, it was the top 3,000 spots. The disciples of the 9th sect were fuming, and conflicts broke out constantly. During the 3 years which had passed, people often came to pay respects to Meng Hao and ask that he do something. But Meng Hao was in secluded meditation and wouldn't take visitors. The disciples of the 9th sect could understand that, but it didn't stop the chosen from the other sects from virtually going crazy. That was especially true of those who held spots in the 9th sect's top 3,000. As for the few hundred from the 9th sect who remained in that group, their madness also increased. Rumors even started to spread that Fang Mu had only been trying to get famous. People claimed that what had happened 3 years before was a mere fluke, and that now he didn't dare to show his face. At first, such rumors were only whispered here and there. But after 2 years passed, and the other sects occupied 90% of the top 10,000 spots on the ninth sect's vast expanse shrine, the rumors raged like wildfire. It got to the point that the entire vast expanse school was talking about the matter. What happened with Fang Mu that year was a quirk, that's all. He's been in secluded meditation for 5 years and has never come out. Obviously, our challenge has him scared and hiding. Even if it wasn't a fluke, I heard that after he summoned the 10th heaven, he experienced a tribulation. He probably got seriously injured. I got my hands on some verified information that Fang Mu was injured so badly, his cultivation base won't make any progress within 100 years. In fact, it's even regressing. More and more rumors spread. The disciples of the ninth sect were so protective of Fang Mu's name that it even led to blows on some occasions. However, the ninth sect was only one of 9 sects, so no matter what they did, it was impossible to sway the opinions of the chosen of the entire vast expanse school. Eventually, most people came to believe the rumors. At the same time, it became completely commonplace for the cultivators of the other sects to come to the vast expanse shrine in the ninth sect to earn their name. Another 5 years passed. Meng Hao had been in secluded meditation for 10 years. The conflicts over the ninth sect's vast expanse shrine had reached a boiling point. Of the top 30,000 names, only 4,000 belonged to the ninth sect. Their own vast expanse shrine had been occupied by others, leaving the disciples of the ninth sect feeling completely humiliated and in a state of madness. Shockingly, it reached the point where the top 10 contained only 2 chosen from the ninth sect. Other than Meng Hao in first place and another chosen in 5th place, the rest of the spots were taken by chosen from other sects. The humiliation and the conflicts worsened. And yet, the paragons of the ninth sect and all the other sects didn't stop any of it from happening. As long as the conflicts didn't get too out of hand, then it was viewed as a way for the overall power of the vast expanse school to increase. That was especially true of the disciples of the ninth sect, who had produced far more chosen in the past 10 years because of that pressure. Increasing numbers of disciples came to Meng Hao's mountain to try to persuade him to do something. At one point, more than 10,000 disciples all went at the same time. Yanner was very annoyed by everything that was happening. Her cultivation had advanced by leaps and bounds in the past 10 years, and although she wasn't even close to catching up to Meng Hao, she was in the Tao-seeking stage, very close to her immortal tribulation. One day when meditating, she was forced to open her eyes because of the cacophonous clamor outside the mountain. "Eldest brother, please come down from your mountain." Eldest brother, the ninth sect only has a few thousand spots in the vast expanse shrine's top 30,000. Please come down. Eldest brother, rumors are flying everywhere. People are accusing you of things. Eldest brother, come down from the mountain. Our frustration has been building for 10 years and we need your help to vent it. Yenner frowned. During the past 10 years, she had watched in frustration as the other sects continuously challenged and provoked the ninth sect. She had asked her master about the matter, but he didn't seem to care much. Furthermore, in recent years, he had come to approach a critical juncture in his cultivation and told Yanner not to bother him about the matter anymore. So annoying, she thought. What's wrong with these people? Don't they have their own vast expanse shrine to challenge? What's the point in showing off in the ninth sect? With a cold harumph, she walked out of her room to go console all of the fellow disciples who had come to pay respects to her master. As soon as she walked out, though, she frowned. Among the people who had come to visit, there were many unfamiliar faces. There were even chosen from other sects, who by this point had begun to treat the ninth sect as if it were their own home and were staring at her with cold smiles. Chapter 1478, The Third Mirror Shard. The disciples of the ninth sect had originally wanted to join forces and kill the people from the other sects, but ninth sect's leadership, including its paragon, had prevented that from happening. In the final analysis, the ninth sect was part of the group of 9 sects that made up the vast expanse school, not an independent entity. It was true that the ninth sect's expansion and growth in the outside was a terrifying thing to the other sects, and the sheer number of cultivators who made up their forces there was fear-inspiring. But in the end, the ninth sect had not split off from the vast expanse school to be independent. Also, the ninth sect was actually benefiting from the matter with the vast expanse shrine. Not only did the ninth sect have more disciples in the rankings than any other individual sect, But the way the disciples fought even harder because of the humiliation also led to spectacular results. Most importantly, the disciples of the ninth sect had become completely united. The fighting and scheming which had once gone on between them was now mostly a thing of the past, and they were completely unified against the outside forces. It wasn't that the other sects didn't realize this. They were also benefiting from the current situation and were content to let things play out. Of course, the main reason was that the vast expanse school's 9 essences paragon still hadn't returned after 10 years. Except for Meng Hao, who was out searching for the copper mirror shards, the rest were still inside the necropolis. Because of all of these varied reasons, as long as the cultivators from the other sects didn't violate any of the ninth sect's rules, they were allowed to set up camp in the ninth sect. Of course, that stipulation didn't apply to everyone, only to the people who held a spot on the ninth sect's vast expanse shrine. It was essentially an unwritten rule, and it ensured that if the ninth sect's disciples wanted to drive away the intruders, they simply had to occupy all the spots on their own sect's vast expanse shrine. Currently, Yanner had just emerged from the mountain where Meng Hao was secluded in meditation. When she saw the numerous cultivators from other sects looking at her coldly, her expression was calm. Then she looked at her fellow disciples of the ninth sect, smiled, and proceeded to placate them, reminding them that her master was at a critical juncture in his secluded meditation. The disciples who had come to beg Meng Hao to emerge were just as zealously devoted to him as they had been 10 years ago. Regardless of the rumors flying about, they felt exactly the same way. That, coupled with Yanner's placating words, ensured that they quickly calmed down. However, it was at this point that a cultivator from one of the other sects walked out from the crowd, a cold smile on his face. "Well, you certainly have a way with words, girl. You have a measly Tao-seeking cultivation base, and yet you manage to placate all these people. Well, let me tell you, to the rest of us, all you're doing is intimidating people in the name of your master, like the fox who exploited the tiger's might to cow the jungle. Since your master doesn't dare to leave his mountain, do you dare to challenge the vast expanse shrine? Or how about this, what if we hurt you? Then will your master dare to stick his head out of the turtle shell he's hiding in?" The cultivators from the other sects started laughing sarcastically. The disciples of the ninth sect bristled with rage, and it seemed like a fight might break out at any moment. 10 years ago, Yanner might have gotten mad, but she was different now. She had grown up, and therefore her response to the provocation was to laugh. At the same time, her gaze turned icy cold. These cultivators from the other sects weren't in the immortal realm, but rather the ancient realm, and yet when she spoke to them, she seemed completely indifferent to that. "When I was younger," she said calmly, "there were many things about life I didn't understand. Once, I took a trip to a local bazaar and was kidnapped by a cultivator from the 8th sect who wanted to use me as a cultivation vessel." When Yanner began to speak, the cultivators from the other sects were wondering what her point was, and they frowned slightly, but continued to stare at her coldly. "In the 8th sect, the cultivator who had kidnapped me slapped me across the face, which hurt quite a bit. My master then requested that the 9th paragon interfere. He ended up slaughtering quite a few members of Patriarch Kai Feng's clan, as well as other powerful experts who had stood by mocking me. Back then, I didn't really understand everything that was happening, but later on I realized that among the people killed were cultivators of the ancient realm and the Tao realm. There were even Tao lords. Oh, there was a Tao sovereign too." She smiled slightly. At this point, complete silence prevailed. "Because of what happened, my master felt a bit useless, like he couldn't even protect his own apprentice. That was why he chose to challenge the vast expanse shrine, to make a name for himself, and to ensure that no one would ever dare to bully me, his apprentice. The result was that he took first place in the vast expanse shrine and summoned the 10th heaven." Although she was smiling as she spoke, her words caused the eyes of the surrounding cultivators to go wide. Before this moment, none of them had known that the reason Fang Mu challenged the vast expanse shrine was because his apprentice had been bullied. The disciples from the other sect looked on with flickering expressions. Although they had been willing to open their mouths earlier, the truth was that they really were scared of Meng Hao. "Oh right, there was one time when a paragon from some other sect, I forget which one, brought a girl from his clan here to visit. She said something to offend me, and regardless of the fact that a paragon was present, my master slapped her twice across the face and even crushed her Tao heart. So if you really want my master to come out and destroy you, then go ahead. I'm standing right here. I won't even dodge your blow." She smiled a beautiful smile, but when the cultivators from the other sects saw it, their hearts began to pound. She stood there a moment amidst the silence. then spoke once again in a powerful voice. "If you don't have the guts to do that, then please screw the hell off." With that, she turned and headed back to the mountain. After Yanner left, the disciples of the ninth sect laughed mockingly at the other cultivators, then slowly dispersed. The cultivators from the other sects had extremely unsightly expressions on their faces as they also left. Many people bore witness to the event, even Meng Hao, who was watching from within his secluded meditation facilities. After the matter concluded, he closed his eyes and paid the matter no further heed, continuing on with the same thing he had been doing for the past 10 years: extinguish his immortal soul lamps, one by one. By this point, he had extinguished about 90% of them. There were now only 10 that remained lit. However, without the right circumstances, it wasn't a simple task to accomplish. As for his true self, acquiring the third mirror shard hadn't gone very smoothly. Not only did the giant basilisk lizard have battle prowess comparable to Meng Hao's true self, it was also exceedingly crafty. Eventually, it had swallowed Meng Hao, whereupon the battle between them was fought via their souls. After 10 years, the soul battle was still raging. Back on planet Vast Expanse, Meng Hao's clone murmured, "Soon enough. My true self should be able to suppress that basilisk within a few more months and acquire the third mirror shard." With that, he immersed himself in the task of extinguishing his soul lamps. A few months later, out in the starry sky of the Vast Expanse, rumbling sounds could be heard in the second of the group of 3 vortexes. A massive howl of pain then echoed out, along with an explosive burst of energy. Within the vortex, the huge lizard's body was twisting and turning as sounds like that of thunder echoed out from inside of it. Before long, the basilisk roared, spitting out a burst of chi that became a windstorm. The vortex distorted, and a figure appeared. It was none other than Meng Hao's true self. Black armor covered his arm, and within his hand, a mirror shard was melting. It fused into the armor, which began to expand, growing even stronger than before. The basilisk glared at Meng Hao, then roared again as it fell back in retreat. Even after 10 years, it had failed to crush Meng Hao. In the end, had been injured and defeated, and robbed of its mirror shard. As the basilisk watched Meng Hao's energy rise, a glint of fear could be seen in its eyes. "You got the treasure, why haven't you left yet?" the basilisk asked, its voice ancient, and its divine will so powerful that everything in the area shook. Meng Hao's true self glanced over at the basilisk, an arrogant gleam in his eyes. The basilisk was strong, stronger even than the sect leader and Bai Wuchen. Of all the Peak 9 Essences experts Meng Hao's true self had ever faced, this lizard was by far the strongest. Were that not the case, it wouldn't have taken him 10 years to get the mirror shard. After the mirror shard fused fully into the armor, Meng Hao faced the basilisk, his eyes glittering. "If you wish," he said, "you can leave this place and be my servant for 1,000 years." The basilisk stared in shock, then began to laugh, killing intent swirling in its eyes. "Say that after you transcend, and maybe I might just agree." Although it feared Meng Hao, he did not possess battle prowess equivalent to a transcendent cultivator, so the idea of being his servant for 1,000 years was laughable. Meng Hao didn't seem offended. He gave the basilisk a profound look and smiled slightly. "Fine, it's settled. I'll come back for you later." With that, he turned and shot off into the distance. The lizard looked at him with disdain, turning a deaf ear to his words. After Meng Hao left, it closed its eyes and went back to sleep. Meng Hao's true self sped through the starry sky, using the 3 mirror shards to detect the fluctuations of the fourth, which he immediately headed toward. Meanwhile, back on the 9th continent of planet Vast Expanse, in the 9th sect, on the mountain which belonged to Meng Hao's clone, Yanner was preparing to face her immortal tribulation. Her tribulation was different from Meng Hao's. It was not monumentally shocking, but was more like the tribulations faced by everyone else. Meng Hao didn't help her, he simply stood off to the side watching. Lightning crashed constantly as Yanner completely transformed from mortal to immortal. As it happened, she became even more beautiful, and her aura became more otherworldly. Meng Hao was shocked as he realized that her appearance now reminded him even more of Chu Yuyan. The immortal tribulation lasted for 3 days. In the end, the tribulation lightning faded away and Yanner emanated immortal chi. Her immortal meridians were fully opened, and as she hovered in midair, she looked like a celestial goddess. Finally, she turned to Meng Hao and smiled. "Master, I've achieved immortal ascension. Aren't you going to give me a gift?" Meng Hao smiled and shook his head in amusement. Although he looked young physically, the air he exuded made him seem profoundly ancient. His gaze was soft as he pulled out the gift he had prepared, and yet Yanner shook her head in refusal. A crafty glint in her eyes, she said, "I don't want any magical items or medicinal pills or techniques. I just want to see my master, see you, once again on top of a mountain, smiling at me." Meng Hao was taken aback as he realized that he wasn't sure if he was looking at Yanner or Chu Yuyan. /expand. Meng Hao stood there silently. When he saw Chu Yuyan's soul, he had decided to pay the debt he owed her by means of a master and apprentice relationship. But now, he wasn't sure if that was the right decision. He couldn't pretend to hold any feelings in his heart other than his thirst for revenge for the mountain and sea realm. He desired the mountain and sea butterfly, and desired to unearth the secrets which were buried within the starry sky of the vast expanse. The only thing he wanted for Chu Yuyan was to protect her and to give her the best of everything. He had no desire to see her hurt and only wanted her to be happy. Therefore he stood there silently, which in turn caused Yanner to start to get nervous. She gnawed on her lip, wondering if she had said or done something wrong. Unsure of what to do, she also just stood there looking at Meng Hao, the seemingly young old man. Meng Hao was a bit in a daze. Time passed. Soon it was dawn. A few days ago, some disciples had challenged the vast expanse shrine, and although no one made it into the top 10, the 9th sect chosen who occupied the 13th and 17th places were supplanted. That in turn caused conflicts to break out between the 9th sect disciples and the disciples from the other sects. As a result, an even larger group of disciples from the 9th sect came to Meng Hao's mountain to ask him to do something. "Eldest brother, please come down from your mountain. Eldest brother, come down from the mountain. Eldest brother, please come down." More and more such calls filled the air. There were tens of thousands of disciples gathered around Meng Hao's mountain, all hoping to catch a glimpse of him, that dazzling figure from 10 years ago. They had come here in good faith, filled with ardor and hope. In recent days, increasing numbers of slanderous and salacious rumors about Fang Mu had been spread, until everyone in the vast expanse school was talking about them. Despite that, the disciples of the 9th sect did not waver in their devotion to him. They felt insulted and enraged, and they only hoped that their eldest brother would make a vicious counterattack. As their voices grew louder, Yanner bowed her head, looking more upset than before. But then Meng Hao's absent-mindedness faded away, and he looked softly at her. He reached out, and just as he had when she was a child, he bopped her head. "All right," he said, smiling. Her eyes widened as she looked up at him. Then she saw his smile, and it was like looking at the bright blue sky. Her eyes began to shine, and she began to jump up and down in excitement. "Master, master," she exclaimed excitedly, "I know exactly what you should do. Why don't you go back to the vast expanse shrine and summon the 10th heaven again?" She was hoping that such an act would be a powerful blow against the cultivators from the other sects. "What would be the point in that?" Meng Hao asked, shaking his head. Then he swished his sleeve and began to walk down the mountain. Yanner followed on his heels. "What do you mean? What are you going to do, master?" In the years that had passed, Yanner had grown much more mature. In public, she was a responsible adult who could take charge, but in front of Meng Hao, she was like a little girl. Meng Hao didn't answer her question. After stepping off the mountain, the crowd of tens of thousands of disciples outside saw him and instantly exploded in excitement. At once, a huge cheer echoed out. As for the cultivators from the other sects, they had originally assumed that this day would be like all the others, in which Fang Mu remained hidden away. But then they saw who had just emerged, and their hearts trembled. Meng Hao's fame was such that, despite the passage of 10 years, he was just as impressive as before. The disciples from the other sects felt their minds spinning, and they began to pant. Without any hesitation, they produced jade slips which they used to inform the other top chosen from their various sects of what was happening. Within moments, the news of Meng Hao coming down from the mountain spread like a blast of wind through the 9th sect. Countless disciples from the 9th sect, after 10 years of stifling pressure, were thrown into excitement. After 10 long years, many of them had begun to grumble inwardly at Meng Hao, but now that vanished, and they all dropped what they were doing and flew out to see him. Eldest brother came down off the mountain. Eldest brother left the mountain. Ha ha ha, the day has finally arrived. Eldest brother came down from the mountain, and now he's going to crush everyone. More and more people began rushing toward the area from all directions. The crowd quickly grew from tens of thousands to 100,000, then 1,000,000, then several million. Beams of light shot toward Meng Hao's mountain in seemingly endless fashion. The chosen from the other sects that weren't in the area were also notified via Jade slip, and began to pant, their eyes shining brightly. For 10 years they had been provoking the ninth sect. For 10 years they had been trying to force Meng Hao to do something. That was the only chance they had to potentially destroy the legend that he had created. Fang Mu, he's finally come off the mountain. In the location in the ninth sect which had been occupied by the first sect, a gray-haired young man could be seen. He took a deep breath, and his eyes began to shine brightly. More and more people emerged, clustering around him as he flew up into the sky. In the location where the second sect had set up camp, a woman could be seen. She rose to her feet, looking like she wanted to fight. Blood boiling, she shot up into the air. After 10 years of waiting, you'd better not disappoint me, Fang Mu. Chosen from all of the outside sects were in an uproar. All of them wanted to go out and challenge Meng Hao to a fight immediately. 10 years ago you created a legend. Now that 10 years have passed, I'm going to destroy that legend. I worked myself to the bone for 10 years, and now I'm completely prepared. I'm definitely going to surpass Fang Mu. Everyone says that Fang Mu is injured. This time is definitely my opportunity to shine. The entire ninth sect was boiling. Countless cultivators were gathering around Meng Hao's mountain as he stood there, looking out at the crowds with a light smile. Finally, he clasped hands and bowed deeply to everyone. Before he could say anything, everyone shouted out, "Eldest brother." The sound of their voices was like a shockwave that caused the heavens to shake. Yenner stood next to Meng Hao, glowing with excitement. Meng Hao looked around at the crowds and the chosen from the other sects who stood a bit further away. Smiling, he said, "Yenner, you just asked me what I'm going to do. I'm going to take you sightseeing." When Yenner heard that, she looked surprised. But before she could respond, Meng Hao waved his sleeve and flew up into the air. Instantly, his voice rang out for all to hear. "Fellow Taoists," he said, eyes glittering, "please come with me to the 8th sect, the 7th sect, the 6th sect. In fact, we will go all the way to the 1st sect. I'm curious to see what their vast expanse shrines look like." This was his gift to Yenner, and also a breakthrough he had to make after taking his soul lamps to the pinnacle. In response to his words, the disciples of the 9th sect went quiet, but then they let out a heaven-shaking, earth-shattering roar. Everyone was screaming and hollering in excitement. Even the 9th sect's 7 essences paragon chuckled as he looked on from his position on his mountain. "Well, if that's your plan, then allow me to help out a bit," he murmured. "These kids have been bottled up for far too long as it is." Shaking his head, the paragon smiled and waved his hand. Instantly, massive rumbling could be heard as a gigantic spell formation appeared. Teleportation power began to emanate out, and Meng Hao flashed into motion, shooting toward the portal. Yenner followed close behind, bolstered by the power of Meng Hao's cultivation base. At the same time, the excited disciples of the 9th sect took to flight toward the portal. The disciples from the other sects stared in shock for a moment, their faces a bit ashen after the words Meng Hao had just uttered. However, they also took to flight toward the spell formation. Rumbling echoed out as the teleportation power activated. Everything shook and the group vanished. When they reappeared, they were on the 8th continent, above the 8th sect. The sudden arrival of so many people shook the whole 8th sect. 8th sect disciples looked up in surprise as Meng Hao addressed the 8th sect. "I'm Fang Mu of the 9th sect. I've come today to challenge the 8th sect's vast expanse shrine." Even as his voice continued to echo back and forth, and before any of the disciples of the 8th sect had a chance to react, Meng Hao and Yenner flew toward the vast expanse shrine. The 8th sect had no means or method to stop them. After all, chosen from all the other sects had challenged the 9th sect's vast expanse shrine on countless occasions over the last 10 years. Yenner followed Meng Hao excitedly through the crowds of countless 8th sect disciples as he headed directly toward their vast expanse shrine. Soon, they were standing at the foot of the mountain. Meng Hao looked over at Yenner and said, "Yenner, would you like to come with me?" Yenner's jaw dropped, and her heart began to pound so hard she felt like she was hyperventilating. She simply stood there in a daze. She had merely said she wanted to see her master standing on top of a mountain. She had never even guessed that he would bring her here. But then she remembered how he had just said he would take her sightseeing. She stammered. "Don't want to go?" he asked. "I do," she cried, worried that he might not take her after all. He laughed heartily, then turned and began to walk toward the vast expanse shrine. Yenner followed. With his protection, even a place as dangerous as a dragon's pool or a tiger's den would be safe for her. As Meng Hao led Yenner up to the 8th sect's vast expanse shrine, over 100 million disciples from the 9th sect began to cheer. As for the disciples of the 8th sect, they didn't look very happy. Soon the sound of a tolling bell could be heard. It rang once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. It didn't stop. As the bell tolled, Meng Hao took Yanner up the mountain. 10,000 steps, 30,000 steps, 70,000 steps, 90,000 steps, all the way to 100,000 steps. The vast expanse shrine rumbled as the first heaven was summoned, then the second heaven, and the third heaven. It was like the same scene that had played out 10 years ago, something so incredible it was difficult to put into words. Everyone was thoroughly shocked as, in the time it takes a single incense stick to burn, all 10 heavens were summoned. Bells tolled in all the sects. The world was shaken. Meng Hao stood with Yanner atop the 10th heaven, and the mountain breeze stirred their hair as they looked out at the clouds. As for the baptism of the tolling bells, the benefit to Yanner was beyond description. However, she didn't care about any such good fortune. Her face was flushed as she stood next to her master, looking out at heaven and earth. The feeling left her intoxicated. "Yanner," he said softly, "look at the clouds, the mountains, the sky, and the land. Remember this image. However grand your vision is, that is how grand your future can be. It is also how grand your heart can be. We cultivators cultivate, not the body but the heart." Chapter 1479, Stepping on all the sects' shrines. Chapter 1480, Challenging all the sects. As Meng Hao and Yanner stood atop the 10th heaven, they were one with the wind. Meng Hao's softly spoken words entered Yanner's ears and melted down into her heart, where they would remain forever. It was very likely that no matter how many years passed, Yanner would think back to this moment, remember standing next to her master, and think about the words he had spoken to her. Cultivators cultivate, not the body but the heart. As she looked out, she saw the sky stretching out over the lands. She saw how heaven and earth were connected, and she saw the endlessness stars. All of that came to be imprinted onto her heart. Other than the words spoken by Meng Hao there above the 10th heaven, the only sound was that of the gently murmuring wind. It was as if the whole world had slowed down, and the two of them were the only ones in existence, master and apprentice. It was a moment that seemed to last for ages. Eventually, the exultant cries of the disciples of the 9th sect rose up from below. The world was trembling, and the disciples of the 8th sect looked as ashen as if they were dead. As for the chosen who had come from the other sects, they could hear their own hearts pounding in their chests. He said that he's going to visit all of the vast expanse shrines in all of the sects. They exchanged glances, their faces as pale as death. "Damn it, who said Fang Mu was injured? He's not injured at all. He's basically taking his disciples sightseeing." The 8th sect could do nothing more than stew in their bitterness. The cheering of the 9th sect grew more intense, until finally everyone began chanting, "Eldest brother, eldest brother." Then the spell formation appeared again, and the power of teleportation shook everything. Meng Hao's face fairly glowed as he chuckled and said, "All right, let's go to the 7th sect." Yanner took a deep breath and nodded meekly. Meng Hao swished his sleeve, and the two of them led countless cultivators toward the enormous teleportation portal. The disciples of the 9th sect rose up into the sky, clamoring in excitement. The hosts from the 8th sect remained in place, bitterness and other mixed emotions on their faces as they watched the 9th sect vanish. Despite the fact that the 9th sect was now gone, they had left behind a legend, a myth. The disciples of the 8th sect were stifled. Their chosen were left gasping for breath. On their own vast expanse shrine, the name Fang Mu could be seen as clear as day. They could well imagine that in future days to come, people would try to take back first place but would fail. That name would remain there in the 8th sect for all eternity. That was the gift Meng Hao was giving to Yanner, and also his response to the 10 years of challenges issued by the other sects. If you come challenge the 9th sect's vast expanse shrine, well then, I will go to your sect and take first place on yours. I will strike back with extreme prejudice, cleanly and efficiently. Rumbling could be heard above the 7th continent, within the 7th sect. The teleportation portal appeared, and countless disciples from the 9th sect descended. Meng Hao's voice once again rang out. "I am Fang Mu from the 9th sect, here to challenge your vast expanse shrine." His voice joined the ringing of the bells, which still hadn't faded away. Then, he led the exuberant Yanner onto the 7th sect's vast expanse shrine. The disciples and chosen of the 7th sect were shaken as more bells began to ring. From the first step to the 100,000th, from the first heaven to the 10th, everything happened just as before. Heaven shook and the earth quaked. The disciples of the 7th sect looked on with pale faces. At the same time, Yanner gained indescribable good fortune. She was thoroughly baptized, and her cultivation base even increased dramatically. Once again, she was able to look out upon heaven and earth, and as she did, cracking sounds emanated out from within her, which came from her explosive cultivation base growth. Because of the baptism and the other good fortune, she was advancing by leaps and bounds. What was happening this day was certain to be indelibly recorded within the annals of the vast expanse school. It even surpassed the miracle of Meng Hao summoning the 10th heaven in the 9th sect. On this day, Meng Hao accomplished something the likes of which had never occurred within the history of the vast expanse school. He reached the pinnacle of every single vast expanse shrine in all of the sects. He took first place and summoned the 10th heaven. And he didn't do it alone either. He took his apprentice with him. On that day, countless individuals came to learn of Yanner, and innumerable disciples came to envy her with utmost jealousy. And yet all they could do was that envy her. Meng Hao took her from the 7th sect to the 6th. After summoning the 10th heaven there, he went to the 5th sect, the 4th sect, the 3rd sect, the 2nd sect. He didn't tarry or delay. He summoned the 10th heaven in one shrine after another. Because of the good fortune she received, Yanner's cultivation base became more boundless, more profound, and in fact even exceeded that of a chosen. In the vast expanse shrine of the 1st sect, the 10th heaven appeared once again. Heaven and earth trembled, and the world shook. Countless disciples felt as if thunder were crashing in their minds. They could do little more than pant at the unforgettable, history-making events which were unfolding. 9 sects, and all of the 10th heavens. Fang Mu, he fully deserves to be the #1 chosen of the vast expanse school. It's too bad his cultivation base isn't in the Tao realm. If it were, I'd love to see how far he could get on the transcendence path. After all, the vast expanse shrine is for those below the Tao realm. Only the Tao realm can walk the transcendence path. The benefits his apprentice Yanner received from the baptism of the tolling bells is impossible to even imagine. The entire vast expanse school was shaken and in an uproar. The disciples of the 9th sect couldn't stop cheering. From the moment they flew to the 8th sect, all the way to the 1st sect, they continued to shout out at the tops of their lungs. Eldest brother Fang Mu, the sound echoed out without stop. On this day, Meng Hao caused an unimaginable stir. Not only were countless ordinary disciples in the vast expanse school shocked, even the Tao realm experts, the Tao lords, and the Tao sovereigns were all amazed by the miracle which he had pulled off. When the 10th heaven appeared in the 1st sect, paragons from all of the 9 sects came. They were all in the 7 essences level, and yet they were all equally shaken. Although Meng Hao was vastly below them, they had to admit that, in terms of latent talent and future potential, this Fang Mu had long since surpassed them. If things went smoothly for him, then he would one day stand among them as peers, or even exceed them. A future paragon, murmured the 7 essences paragon from the 1st sect. His words instantly gained the approval of all of the other 7 essences paragons from the other sects. Even Streamcloud from the 3rd sect had to concede this point. He truly was a future paragon. Note from Deathblade. This is a short chapter, barely hitting 1,400 words instead of the usually 2,000 or so. Chapter 1481, The Peak of the World. And that he was. His true self was already the most powerful of paragons. As for his clone, Meng Hao was sure that if he desired to walk the path of the paragon, he would definitely reach the 9 essences level. It might take some time, but he would succeed in the end. However, that was not what he chose to do. Having a 9 essences paragon clone wouldn't help him to transcend, and therefore, his original plan had never changed. He would transcend with his true self, and then, with everything he had gained in recent years, with the 9th sect and all its power, with the ghosts of the necropolis, he would unleash deadly violence upon the immortal God continent and the Devil Realm continent, and most especially, the 33 heavens. He would return to his home, to the mountain and sea butterfly, to his family and friends. He would return to the mountains and seas, to get revenge. That was his focus, his obsession, something which could never be erased from his mind. He would reforge the mountain and sea realm, he would resurrect the meat jelly, and he would call back the copper mirror. Even if that was a defiance of the vast expanse, he would do it. Meng Hao stood there atop the 10th heaven in the 1st sect. Smiling, he breathed in deeply. Down below, the countless disciples of the 1st sect looked up with mixed emotions. Their faces were devoid of blood as they stared bitterly at Meng Hao. The chosen of the 1st sect looked on blankly. They were truly eagles, but as of this moment, They had no other choice but to admit that the generation into which they had been born contained a towering mountain. That mountain was something that stretched so high above them they would never be able to fly over it. Silence prevailed. Also in the first sect was a woman, the current holy daughter of the generation. She was Han Bei, and as she looked up at Meng Hao and Yanner atop the 10th heaven, she felt profoundly uneasy. Although Meng Hao hadn't caused any trouble for her throughout the years, she still feared him. The more he cared about Chu Yuyan, the safer she felt, and yet the more she felt safe, the more that sense of safety scared her. It was a paradox that only seemed to increase in intensity, and was influencing her mission here in the vast expanse school. On more than one occasion, she had considered investigating why Meng Hao had created this clone. However, she didn't dare to even get close to him, and could only manipulate things from afar. Even then, she didn't dare to push things too far, and thus was left only with speculations. Over the years, she had come up with numerous theories, but could not confirm any of them. Sometimes, she even felt as though all of her theories were completely incorrect. After a moment of looking at Meng Hao and Yanner, she sighed and looked away. The wind blew atop the 10th heaven. As people looked on, Yanner's gaze fell upon her master, and her eyes shone radiantly. It was as if this master of hers had become the most important person in her entire life. "Master," she said loudly. "Yes," Meng Hao said, smiling. "Master." Yes," Meng Hao gaped, looking over at her. "Master," she cried again. Pretending to look very serious, Meng Hao reached out and bopped her head. She rubbed her head, looking very resentful. However, he merely smiled at her, well aware that she was completely ecstatic at the moment. Then he looked back out at heaven and earth, and his eyes gleamed with anticipation. "The vast expanse shrine offers no further good fortune for me. If I want to extinguish my last 10 soul lamps, then the only option I have is to walk the transcendence path." In the vast expanse school, the two most famous trials by fire were the vast expanse shrines and the transcendence path. Only cultivators in the Tao realm would tread the transcendence path. Of course, just walking that path didn't guarantee transcendence. However, there was still that hope. That path was the traditional and proper way to try to transcend. But to date, not even the sect leader or others of his level had been able to reach its end. It was a very difficult path to travel, and it seemed endless. However, the Tao realm experts of the vast expanse school were entranced with it, mostly because of the multitudinous good fortune therein, good fortune that could cause one's cultivation base to advance by leaps and bounds. Meng Hao took a deep breath. He had a strong premonition that his clone would be able to complete the first sealing mark of the 9th hex on the transcendence path. He had further speculations regarding how to complete the full 9th hex, and was sure that those speculations would also be verified on the transcendence path. However, now was not the time. He had the feeling that once he headed down that path, it would be a very, very long time before he came back. In fact, it was even possible that he never would. Besides, there were still a few matters to handle within the vast expanse school. He looked over at Yanner, and could see that because of the good fortune of the vast expanse shrine, her cultivation base was thoroughly stabilized, and had even made significant progress. She was now in the mid-immortal realm. Although she had just made that breakthrough thanks to the baptism of the tolling bells, Meng Hao could see that in the coming years, her cultivation base would continue to advance rapidly. Her latent talent had been completely optimized by the baptism, and her chi passageways, as well as any cultivation bottlenecks, had been cleared. In the vast expanse school, good fortune like that was something only Yanner could acquire. You could even say that on her path of cultivation, she had already opened the way to a great Tao. "Come on," Meng Hao said with a smile, "let's go back to the 9th sect." They, along with the cheering disciples of the 9th sect, stepped back into the teleportation portal. As the first sect disciples looked on with bitter expressions, they vanished. The rumbling of the spell formation shook all sects from the 1st to the 8th as they returned to the 9th sect. The cheering shouts of the 9th sect's disciples shook the vast expanse school. A legend had been established which no one would ever be able to top. When the group appeared back in the 9th sect, those who had remained behind also started cheering loudly. "They're back, everyone's back. Eldest brother Fang Mu has returned. Eldest brother, eldest brother." The 9th sect seethed with excitement. The disciples who had been too slow to join the others in stepping through the teleportation portal earlier now began to crowd around and cheer for their eldest brother. On that day, a grand celebration began in the 9th sect. The news of what had happened filled the other sects. For a long time to come, the disciples of the ninth sect would be filled with unmatched joy. As for the disciples from the other sects who had set up camp in the ninth sect, they made a swift departure. None of them dared to remain behind. As for the 10 years of provocation and challenges, they were now officially a thing of the past. Only a few people were aware that what Meng Hao had done was because of a few words uttered by Yanner. Most of the disciples thought that he had done it as a way to tell the chosen of the other sects that if they wanted to challenge him, they could remain in their own sects to do so. There was no need for them to come to the ninth sect. In order to make things easier for them, he simply put his name on their vast expanse shrines. Because of Meng Hao, the spirits of the entire ninth sect were instantly lifted. Their leader was the overbearing, domineering ninth paragon, who was also their protector. Among their number was the ultimate chosen, the disciple who had completely dominated the vast expanse school, Fang Mu. Because of all of that, the ninth sect was completely different from the other sects. The celebrations lasted for more than a month. Eventually things settled down, but deep down, the disciples of the ninth sect were still extremely excited. The glory and honor they felt, as well as the sense of belonging, would never be erased. During that month, Meng Hao had no choice other than to receive the various visitors who came to offer their respects. However, after the month passed, the number of visitors didn't decrease. In fact, they increased. Finally, he was forced to close the mountain. From then on, he never left the mountain, and politely refused to see all visitors. However, instead of going into secluded meditation, he spent time teaching cultivation techniques to Yanner. Time passed. Before long, 3 years had gone by. During that time, Meng Hao paid little heed to his own cultivation base. He helped Yanner to refine her immortal meridians, benefiting her with all of his experience regarding cultivation. He helped her gain more Tao enlightenment, holding nothing back. He spared no effort in passing on to her everything he knew. Because of such conscientious teaching on his part, Yanner's cultivation base rose with shocking speed, and was far more stable than anyone else in her generation. During those years, a certain feeling slowly rose up within Yanner. Eventually, she began to laugh less, and when she looked at Meng Hao, it was with concern, as if she couldn't bear the thought of parting with him. After all her years of being dependent on him, she had come to be very sensitive to his personality. Based on everything that had happened during the past 3 years, she came to feel strongly that Master is going to leave. That scared her. No matter how many times she asked about it, Meng Hao would always just smile and decline to comment. However, whenever his gaze fell upon her, it was warmer than before, and it almost seemed like he was recalling past times. Another 10 years passed. Yanner's cultivation base continued to climb higher and higher. However, her heart only continued to grow more anxious. One day she saw a jade slip belonging to her master that apparently contained information about the sect's transcendence path. At that point, her heart began to pound. She knew that the transcendence path was something only Tao realm cultivators were qualified to tread. Supposedly, it contained incredible good fortune, and yet few people actually dared to walk upon it. After all, it also contained profound danger. It was not the vast expanse shrine, which was located in the sect itself. It was in the outside world, located within a rift in the starry sky of the vast expanse. After entering, one would be completely cut off, and would not return for dozens or even hundreds of years. It was a path that a cultivator could only step onto twice in a lifetime. Years ago, Yanner would have pressed her master about the matter, and wouldn't have given up until she figured out a way to prevent him from going to such a dangerous place. But she had grown up, and understood that it was a decision for him to make. She knew that within her master's heart was an obsession that even she couldn't comprehend. And so she said nothing. During the 13 years which passed, Meng Hao extinguished a few more soul lamps. Now, he had only 7 which continued to burn. Another year passed, and Yanner was now at the peak of the immortal realm. The speed of her progress was far beyond normal, causing widespread shock among the disciples of the ninth sect. But when they considered who her master was, they realized that it wasn't such an unreasonable thing. After all, the good fortune of 8 vast expanse shrine was beyond incredible. Chapter 1482, Looking Back at This Life. That year, Yanner faced her ancient tribulation. That day was one of utmost importance to Meng Hao as well. He personally set up the relevant spell formations, and arranged for the energy of heaven and earth in the ninth sect to act as Dharma protector. Several days later, when the ancient tribulation finally concluded, he breathed a sigh of relief. He watched Yanner pass her ancient tribulation, watched her ignite her soul lamps, and then watched her close her eyes in meditation to begin breathing exercises. The whole time his gaze was soft and kind. To mortals, she wouldn't be considered young, but to cultivators in the ancient realm she was like a girl. The passage of time left no scars upon her. She only continued to grow more beautiful and at the same time mature. To other members of the sect, she was truly a chosen, someone who knew how to conduct herself properly and with decorum, someone everyone enjoyed being around. It was only around Meng Hao that she would pout and act like a coquettish little girl. Meng Hao could tell that Chu Yuyan's aura was growing stronger and stronger on her. Sometimes, he couldn't even tell the difference between the two. That was especially true as he watched her doing breathing exercises after passing her ancient tribulation. Many memories flitted through his mind. In her last life, Chu Yuyan had never passed through the immortal realm. But in this life, with Meng Hao's help, she was reaching the highest pinnacles. Furthermore, regardless of whether her name was Chu Yuyan or Yanner, she had earned a place in his heart for all eternity. "It's about time for me to let go too," he murmured. A few days later, Yanner opened her eyes and glanced over at Meng Hao. From the look in his eyes, she seemed to understand what was about to happen. She loathed the idea of parting with him, but it had been years since she came to understand the choice he would eventually make. Today, there was something deep within his eyes that explained everything. "Master," she said, her voice quavering. "You're in the ancient realm now," he said softly. "You understand how to go about extinguishing your soul lamps, right? If there are any areas you don't understand, now is the time to ask me." Before the ancient realm, cultivators can receive assistance from others. In fact, such assistance can make things much easier. However, starting with the ancient realm, you'll have to rely completely upon yourself. Never forget what I told you before. We cultivators cultivate not the body but the heart. Tears welled up in Yanner's eyes and then began to stream down her cheeks. She was trembling. "Master, I've prepared 9 jade slips for you. Each one of them contains some of the power of my divine sense. If you encounter a dangerous situation, you can be protected." By this point, Meng Hao's clone was extremely close to the Tao realm, and he could even draw upon some of the power of his true self. As such, the 9 jade slips held some of his true self's divine sense power, and would be able to keep Yanner safe wherever she went on planet Vast Expanse. I've also prepared 7 volumes of Tao treatises, which contain all of the magical techniques and divine abilities I've learned in my life. There are also 100,000 medicinal pills which I concocted especially for you. That should ensure your path of cultivation is a smooth one. As for magical items, I never did build up a huge collection, but what I did gain, I'm leaving to you. There are also immortal jades and spirit stones. In the past, I used to be extremely attracted to them, but now that I think back it just makes me sigh. I'm leaving everything to you. "Master, I don't want any of that, I just want—" She trailed off, tears flowing down her face. She was afraid, terrified even. Although it had been 10 years since she realized what her master planned to do, she still wasn't ready for it to actually happen. "Because of the fame I have built up," Meng Hao continued, "no one will dare to bully you while you're in the 9th sect. Everyone here will take care of you. I've also paid a visit to the Paragon to ask him to watch out for you. I might not be here, but I've made various other preparations to keep you safe. For example, the Mastiff, who will continue to accompany you." Anxiety erupted within Yanner. "No, I don't want that. I don't care, Master. Yanner," he growled. A tremor ran through her. In her entire life, she couldn't remember a single time when her master had been strict with her. This was the first time. Even more tears flowed down her face. "You've grown up," he said softly. Then he reached out and bopped her head. She subconsciously bowed her head, weeping. He shook his head. "Come on," he said. "I want to take you somewhere." As he turned to leave, she rose to her feet, wiped the tears off her cheeks, and followed. For the first time in 13 years, master and apprentice left the 9th sect. They traveled to the border region of the 9th continent, where they found a river, next to which was a village. They arrived around evening, when smoke was rising lazily from the chimneys of the houses. Meng Hao caught sight of the house where he had lived as a child in this life. It had long since changed ownership. The scholar who had found him in the river had passed away many years ago. However, the old man who had cared for him was still alive. He had ended up marrying the village widow, and both of them were now completely ancient, with numerous children and grandchildren. When Meng Hao saw the old man, he thought back to many warm memories from this life, and a slight smile touched his face. Yanner stood quietly at his side. She said nothing, but she could sense the tender feelings in her master's heart. They left around dawn. Meng Hao didn't actually meet with the old man in person. However, he left behind numerous age-prolonging, longevity-enhancing medicinal pills, as well as jade slips which would protect the man and his bloodline for generations to come. It wasn't long after Meng Hao left that the old man yawned and walked out of his room. When he looked down, he saw all the items that Meng Hao had left, and his jaw dropped. After some contemplation, he shivered and looked up into the heavens. Finally, he smiled. "Hey, Aoi, you came back." He chuckled as he recalled the young boy from so many years ago. A few days later, Meng Hao stood at the very top of the vast expanse shrine, where he clasped hands to the heavens. "I am Fang Mu from the 9th sect of the vast expanse school. I desire to walk the transcendence path. Paragon, please open the portal." As his voice echoed out, the paragon first gaped in confusion, then began to reel in shock. A buzz filled the 9th sect as countless disciples flew toward the mountain peak upon which rose the vast expanse shrine. There, they saw Meng Hao standing at the peak, and Yanner standing at the bottom of the mountain, looking up at him. "He's going to walk the transcendence path." Indeed, the transcendence path is exactly the type of place for a chosen like him. The other chosen in the 9th sect sighed, mixed emotions playing out on their faces. People had long since speculated that he might do something just like this. The truth was that ancient realm cultivators weren't prohibited from walking the transcendence path. However, it was usually done only by unique chosen with special qualifications. As for Meng Hao, if he didn't qualify to be chosen, then no one in the vast expanse school did. Naturally, he was qualified to walk the transcendence path. Yanner stood there silently, looking up at her master atop the mountain. Her eyes gleamed with determination, and she took a deep breath, telling herself that she had to be strong. Yet she couldn't stop the tears from rolling down her cheeks. Meng Hao's voice was still echoing out, when the voice of the 7 Essences Paragon responded from within the 9th sect. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely," Meng Hao replied, his voice filled with a decisiveness that could sever nails and chop iron. Moments later, an intense rumbling sound filled heaven and earth, as if someone were working a type of grand magic. It sounded like the sky itself were being ripped open. Everything shook as an enormous rift appeared up above. The rift shone with a 7-colored glow, dazzling and radiant. The light then transformed into a staircase, which descended from above and came to a stop directly in front of Meng Hao. He looked up at the staircase, and could see that within the rift in the sky was another world. It was at this point that an ancient voice echoed out. "The sect rules of the vast expanse school state that any disciple who enters the transcendence path must leave behind a soul lamp. If the lamp shines, the cultivator lives. If the lamp is extinguished, the cultivator has died." The countless disciples in the area looked on silently. Meng Hao waved his sleeve, causing a stream of soul fire to fly out from his forehead. The soul fire swirled through the air, transforming into the shape of a soul lamp. This particular soul lamp was different from his collection of ancient realm soul lamps. It was formed from his own soul fire, and would indicate to the outside world whether or not he was still alive. Based on the state of that flame, people outside would know the state he was in as he walked the transcendence path. What people did to the flame on the outside, however, wouldn't affect Meng Hao. He waved his hand, sending the soul fire lamp over to Yanner. "Place that in my secluded meditation facilities," he said, smiling. With that, he took a deep breath, stepping forward onto the staircase and speeding upward toward the rift. As he rose higher into the sky, the 9th sect's 7 Essences Paragon spoke into his ear. "Fang Mu, there are many things in life which can't be forced. If you reach a point where you can't go onward, you must turn back." Just when Meng Hao was about to step into the rift and enter that most ancient transcendence path, Yanner suddenly called out in a loud voice. "Master, do you remember back when you told me the story of Chu Yuyan? You promised that if I wanted to hear the rest of the story, that you would tell it to me." Meng Hao stopped and looked back down at the mountains below and at Yanner standing there in the crowd. "I remember," he said, smiling softly. "Do you want to hear it now?" She trembled, tears pouring down her face. "No, not now," she replied. "Master, can you tell me the rest of the story when you get back?" The idea of parting with her master hurt so much that it felt like her heart was being crushed. "Of course," he replied, nodding. With that he turned, took a deep breath, and stepped into the rift onto the Transcendence Path. Chapter 1483, On the Transcendence Path. From the moment of the creation of the vast expanse school until now, The transcendence path had always been of vital importance. It could even be considered a trial by fire that gave birth to the reserve power of the entire sect. In truth, it wasn't really a trial by fire, not the type that disciples in sects usually participated in. Despite being part of the vast expanse school, the things that happened on the transcendence path were beyond the control of even paragons. Everything depended on the individual involved. Everything depended on chance and luck. From ancient times until now, countless disciples of the vast expanse school had walked the path, and yet none had reached the end. Everyone who returned had done so from somewhere partway along the path. Those who didn't return died along the way. Actually, the transcendence path wasn't really a literal path. It was a very unique location, so much so that even people who had been there and experienced what lay inside had difficulty explaining it to others. It was almost as if there were some magical law at play which prevented people from explaining everything that had happened inside. The first thing Meng Hao saw after entering the rift, after stepping onto the transcendence path, was a lamp. It was a bronze lamp. It actually looked almost completely identical to the bronze lamp inside of his true self. Except this bronze lamp was enormous, so large that it was impossible to describe, larger even than planet vast expanse. The starry sky in this location was the type that made one's mind reel to even look at it. The transcendence path was this bronze lamp. The burning flame of the lamp was made up of three parts: the outer flame, the inner flame, and the heart of the flame. Apparently, they formed three different dimensions within the world, and the light they cast illuminated everything therein. The world was vastly enormous, as was the bronze lamp. In addition to the dimension in the flame, the body of the bronze lamp itself also contained its own dimension. Meng Hao's first thought upon looking at the shocking lamp was that it was actually the same lamp which existed within his true self. Then he couldn't help but think of the Devil Realm's world butterflies, or the precious treasure that was the mountain and sea realm, which became the 9 mountains and 9 seas. All of those things could contain worlds of living things. This bronze lamp that he was looking at was that same type of precious treasure. So the transcendence path is actually broken up into two parts. One part is in the body of the lamp, the other in the flame. As for the flame, it is further broken up into three parts: the outer flame, the inner flame, and the heart of the flame. Meng Hao's eyes glittered with determination. With that, he transformed into a flash of light that shot toward the bronze lamp. The bronze lamp got bigger and bigger as he approached. Time passed. Not even Meng Hao could have predicted that after flying for 7 months, going all out with every scrap of power he could muster, he still wouldn't have reached the lamp itself. By this point, he couldn't even see the lamp's flame anymore, only a world of bronze. His expression was very serious as he continued to fly onward. 3 months later, the lamp started to look different. He could see lands covered with buildings. He saw countless mountain ranges and even rivers and seas. Eventually, his vision swam until he couldn't see. Then, when things were clear again, he was within the world of the bronze lamp. Rumbling sounds echoed out, and an indescribable force pushed down onto him. It felt like countless mountains were trying to crush him, as if an enormous hand were pushing down onto his head. The pressure shoved him down out of the air, sending him speeding toward the ground. A moment later, he slammed into the earth. A boom echoed out, and afterward he lay prone on the ground, blue veins bulging out on his neck and face. He let out a roar, and his body shook violently. After enough time passed for 3 incense sticks to burn, he was finally able to struggle into a crouching position. That effort alone left his garments soaked with sweat. He was trembling physically, and his bones felt like they were on the verge of breaking. His eyes were thoroughly bloodshot. The intensity of the pressure exceeded anything Meng Hao could have imagined, and was the most terrifying weight he had ever borne. Beneath this pressure, every rotation of his cultivation base made it seem like his chi passageways would burst. Despite all of that, his eyes gleamed with focus and even a tinge of madness. Gritting his teeth, he ever so slowly rose to his feet. It took 2 incense sticks worth of time, but in the end he was standing there, roaring at the top of his lungs. In that very same instant, one of his remaining 7 soul lamps was extinguished. The extinguishing of that soul lamp unleashed new life force which flooded into him, strengthening him and allowing him to stand tall and straight. His eyes grew redder, but excitement filled his heart. So this is the transcendence path, huh? I never would have guessed that one of the soul lamps I found so difficult to extinguish could be put out as soon as I entered. He looked around and found himself surrounded by a desolate wasteland. Other than him, no living being could be seen. However, he knew that he couldn't possibly be the only person in here. There were other cultivators from the vast expanse school who had entered the place in the past, and were still inside after countless years. Taking a deep breath, he took a step forward and began to walk. He felt like a mortal plodding along. The path to be tread was a long one. That was something he had come to understand even more clearly as he drew closer to the bronze lamp. Considering his current state, walking the entire length of the bronze lamp, and then reaching the second portion of the transcendence path, seemed almost impossible. And yet he didn't give up. Panting, jaw clenched, he walked alone through the wasteland. That year, some important events occurred within the vast expanse school. Fang Mu, who had established an unheard-of legend within the vast expanse school, who had summoned the 10th heaven of all of the vast expanse shrines of the 9 sects, stepped onto the transcendence path with an ancient realm cultivation base. His departure caused the chosen of the other sects in the vast expanse school to breathe sighs of relief. Living in the same era as Fang Mu made them feel as pressured, as if heaven were weighing down on them. Now they could relax, at least temporarily. No one could say for sure whether Fang Mu would rise to new heights on the transcendence path, or whether he would fade away and never be heard of again. Time would tell. Another thing that happened that year was that the sect leader and the rest of the group who had entered the necropolis finally returned. They had remained within the necropolis for dozens of years, and yet were not able to reach the 9th landmass. They reached the 7th, but were unable to open the path to the 8th. When they returned, some of the original party members were not with them. Those who did return were all in bad shape, and Bai Wuchen hovered on the brink of death. However, all of the group who had returned alive had made significant progress with their cultivation bases. The faint aura of transcendence was upon them, which caused a huge stir in the vast expanse school. Also during that year, Patriarch Kai Feng made a cultivation base breakthrough, acquiring his 9th essence and becoming the 8th paragon. Outside of the vast expanse school, somewhere out in the boundless starry sky, Meng Hao's true self was in the location of the 4th copper mirror shard, flying along at top speed. His face was pale, and blood oozed out of the corners of his mouth. A vast swarm of termites was chasing after him, voraciously devouring everything in their path. At the moment, he had black armor that covered his arm and chest, giving him incredible battle prowess. By now, killing Peak 9 Essence's cultivators would be no difficult task for him. And yet, these termites had him bedraggled and fleeing. The main reason was because there were so many of them they were impossible to even count. Furthermore, each and every one of them emanated brutal auras, the weakest of which was in the immortal realm and the strongest, 9 essences. Their numbers were beyond description. Thankfully, he had prepared well before coming into this area. After speeding along for a short time, he reached a point where he had set up a spell formation earlier. The light of teleportation flickered, and then he vanished. A moment later, the swarm of termites engulfed the teleportation portal. Apparently, even the flickering teleportation portal was something that the termites considered to be food. Crunching sounds emanated out, and in the blink of an eye, the spell formation had been completely consumed. However, being unable to consume Meng Hao's true self, the termites howled in rage. Anyone who could hear the sound of it would be truly shaken. After a while, though, they begrudgingly gave up and returned to their home, a land riddled with countless passageways burrowed here and there. In another location in the starry sky of the vast expanse, dazzling light flickered, and Meng Hao's true self staggered out. He coughed up a mouthful of blood, then closed his eyes and rotated his cultivation base. Rumbling booms like thunder could be heard inside of him as numerous pustules appeared on his skin. They began to wriggle, and then tiny termites burst out from within. Each and every one screamed and then exploded. After expelling and destroying several hundred termites, Meng Hao's body was soaked with blood. However, when he opened his eyes, they shone brightly, and his body quickly recovered. I wonder how many countless ages that swarm of termites has existed. How unimaginable. With that, he looked down at the armor which covered him, as it faded away and transformed into 4 mirror shards. He had found the 4th mirror shard in the termite's nest, and had extracted it from within the body of the termite queen herself. With 4 shards I have half, now to get the 5th shard. My clone is on the transcendence path. Who would have imagined that path to be so difficult? If my speculations are correct, completing the 9th hex is not something that can be done in a single life. I have to collect the rest of these mirror shards, Getting just these two took me a few dozen years, but I suspect that acquiring the final four will take hundreds. He looked around in exhaustion for a moment before sitting down cross-legged to do breathing exercises. After a while, he rose and sped off in the direction of the fifth shard. Expand. 3 years passed. People in the vast expanse school still talked about Fang Mu. As for the mountain he had lived on, only Yanner occupied it now. It was not open to visitors, and her life was once again peaceful and quiet. Without Meng Hao there was no more playful pouting on her part. Sometimes she just sat there in a daze, daydreaming about the past. But there was no avoiding the truth. Her master was gone. Other than practicing cultivation, there was only one thing that she absolutely had to do every day, and that was to visit her master's secluded meditation facilities, where she had enshrined his soul fire. As long as that soul fire burned, her master was alive. One day she came to visit as she always did. She kowtowed to the soul fire and then began to speak in a murmuring voice. "Master, you've been gone for 3 years. That's not too long. Oh, last night when I was practicing cultivation, I finally understood that one magical technique. Another thing you don't know about, Master. I heard that yesterday, those jerks from the other sects started making trouble again. Supposedly, they're going to start challenging the vast expanse shrine once more. Master, there's another thing." Every time Yenner came, she would speak to herself in his fashion, as if her master were standing there in front of her. This time, even as she spoke, a tremor suddenly ran through her, and her voice faltered. Her expression flickered, and the blood drained from her face as she stared in shock at the soul fire. For 3 years, the soul fire hadn't changed at all, but just now it had faded a bit, as though it might wink out at any moment. The sight caused Yanner to shake and her mind to spin. She knew that this was the flame of her master's life force, and that if it went out, it meant that he was dead. Obviously, he must be experiencing some deadly situation on the transcendence path. Her heart filled with bitterness and anxiety, and yet there was nothing she could do to help her master. She could do nothing to change anything, really. "Master, I'm so useless." Tears began to roll down her cheeks as she trembled, still staring at the soul fire. The truth was that Meng Hao really was facing a deadly test on the transcendence path. The pressure he was facing had just increased dramatically. He had continued to walk for 3 years and gradually had become used to the pressure. He had even reached the point where he could jog for a bit. But today, he crossed into a new region in which the pressure suddenly increased by, not double, but tenfold. It happened suddenly and without any warning whatsoever. Meng Hao had literally no time to even react before being slammed down onto the ground. Many of his bones were fractured as he struggled against the pressure, and his flesh was smashed. Cracking sounds could be heard as his skeleton hovered on the brink of being shattered. A sensation of imminent life-or-death crisis swept through him. On top of it all, his cultivation base was suppressed. He began to tremble, and his eyes were completely shot with blood as he let out a howl. However, at the moment, there was nothing he could do. Any other person would have been destroyed instantly, but Meng Hao's true self had created this clone following the pattern laid out by the bronze lamp, making it perfect in every aspect. It was pure, lacking any impurities or defilements, and possessed the ultimate immortal aura. In fact, it was even possible to say that this clone was an immortal body unto itself. When you added in the terrifying divine will of Meng Hao's true self, it meant that the clone was just barely able to survive under this sudden tenfold increase in pressure. Time passed. After 15 or 16 hours, Meng Hao's vision was fading. However, beneath the intense, deadly pressure, he was able to extinguish one of his 6 remaining lit soul lamps. Instantly, life force poured into him, healing his bones and mending his flesh. His cultivation base flourished, and his fading life force once again began to thrive. Having endured through the deadly crisis, Meng Hao struggled into a sitting position. His face was pale, and he was panting as he looked behind him at the path he had walked. As of this moment, he fully understood how the transcendence path worked. The pressure was not something that remained constant. Instead, it would increase explosively. Obviously, the farther one traveled along the path, the more terrifying the pressure got. Furthermore, there was no warning. It would happen in an instant. Life and death were separated by a single step. As Meng Hao's life force was restored, Yanner was there in his secluded meditation facilities in the 9th sect of the vast expanse school, staring at his soul fire. When the flame began to burn brightly once again, she wiped her tears away and made a decision. "Master, I'm going to get strong as quickly as possible. Then, I'll walk the transcendence path with you." Having made her decision, she took a deep breath and left the secluded meditation facilities. From that day on, she didn't remain holed up on the mountain. She left and began to challenge the vast expanse shrine. Although the tolling bells offered no benefit to her, the other good fortune within the vast expanse shrine was still helpful. That was her choice. First challenge the vast expanse shrine, then walk the transcendence path. Another 3 years passed. Meng Hao had now been on the transcendence path for 6 years. So far, he still hadn't caught sight of anyone else. It was as if he were the only living being in all heaven and earth. As he proceeded onward under the incredible pressure, he gradually got used to it. Eventually, he reached the point where he could jog just like he had before. However, he had the feeling that an explosive increase in pressure was coming. As the feeling grew stronger, he pressed onward with increased caution. A few months later, he finally saw someone up ahead. It was a person wearing similar clothes to himself, who proceeded forward with great difficulty, his hair completely disheveled. However, he emanated the aura of the Tao realm. This was the first fellow disciple he had seen so far on the transcendence path. However, before Meng Hao could even call out a greeting, the man up ahead took a step forward, then shuddered and immediately fell to the ground. Then, even as Meng Hao watched, he transformed into a blood mist. It only took a moment for that blood mist to be crushed down into the ground and completely dispersed. Moments later, there was no trace of blood left, nor any other indication that the man had existed. It was almost as if what Meng Hao had seen before was just an illusion. Meng Hao stopped in place to think, his heart pounding. If he hadn't witnessed the man's death, things might have been a bit easier. Ever since 3 years before, when the explosive increase in pressure had happened without any warning, he had always thought it might be better to know beforehand so he could prepare himself. But now he wasn't so sure. Now that he knew where the border existed, he would be able to prepare ahead of time. And yet, that also opened the door for doubt and fear. Moments ago, he had seen a Tao realm expert crushed into a blood mist, and that left him more than a little reluctant. After a long moment passed, his eyes flickered brightly, and he took a deep breath. Rotating his cultivation base, he began to walk forward, filled with determination. Eventually, he reached the border. If he took another step, he would be in exactly the same spot where the Tao realm expert had been destroyed. He lifted his foot up, and without any trembling or hesitation, he stepped forward. Rumbling echoed out as incredible pressure exploded down onto him, pressure that was 20 times as powerful as the pressure he had faced upon entering the transcendence path. A boom could be heard as Meng Hao's body began to explode. Blood spattered everywhere, and the cracking of bones echoed out. The pain was so intense that anyone would scream in response, and yet Meng Hao gritted his teeth and held his breath. Massive rumbling sounds echoed out as he rotated his cultivation base and sent out divine scents. Simultaneously, all of his soul lamps exploded with power. Just when he felt like he couldn't hold on any longer, when his body would fully collapse, one of his final 5 soul lamps winked out. The extinguishing of the soul lamp flooded him with life force, like rainfall onto a parched desert. He immediately began to recover, although it still took effort just to stand in place. He closed his eyes for a long time before finally continuing to plod along like a mortal. 4 lamps left, he murmured hoarsely, gritting his teeth as he walked along. Extinguishing one soul lamp in 3 years was a bit slow, but was a speed Meng Hao could accept. After all, on the outside, it would have taken hundreds of years to extinguish his remaining soul lamps. However, the deadly pressure in this place could stimulate the potential of one's life force. Either you succeeded, or you died. 3 years later, Meng Hao had been on the transcendence path for 9 years, and was facing pressure beyond imagination. He had originally assumed that the pressure in the next region beyond the 20-fold increase would be that of a 30-fold increase. It was only upon stepping into that area that he found, not a 30-fold increase, but 50-fold increase. The explosive level of the pressure completely destroyed half of his body. Blood sprayed in all directions, and it was only by the extinguishing of his 4th soul lamp that he managed to survive. After some further rest and recovery, he proceeded on. 3 more lamps, he thought. His hair was a mess and his face was ashen, but he clenched his jaw and proceeded along. It was in his 12th year on the transcendence path that he finally caught sight of someone up ahead. Not just one person, but 4. They were seated cross-legged several hundred meters up ahead, doing breathing exercises. Their cultivation bases made them all 3 essences Tao Lords, very close to the 4 essences level. As Meng Hao neared, their eyes opened, and they couldn't hold back from being shocked. Ancient realm. The third tribulation can't be passed by anyone below the Tao Lord level. How did he get here? From ancient times until now, ancient realm cultivators haven't been prohibited from traveling this path. However, most of them stop before the third tribulation. Could this be a new chosen from the sect? These four Tao Lords had been away from the sect for an entire 60-year cycle, and were thus unaware of the legendary Fang Mu. Their eyes began to shine brightly as Meng Hao walked up to them. As he neared, one of them called out in a hoarse voice, "What sect are you from, disciple?" Chapter 1484, Extinguishing Soul Lamps on the Path. Chapter 1485, Malicious Intentions. The ninth sect, Meng Hao said, looking over at the four Tao Lords. None of them said even a single word in response. After hearing that Meng Hao was also from the Vast Expanse School, their interest waned. Sometimes plotting, scheming, and even open fighting went on between the various factions of the Vast Expanse School. However, most people weren't willing to bring those conflicts with them into a trial by fire. One could very well end up hurting oneself in so doing. The four Tao Lords ignored Meng Hao, and he ignored them. He continued walking until he was at the same point along the line as them. There he stopped and looked at the area up ahead. Obviously, these four men were sitting in this spot for a reason, and Meng Hao was well aware of exactly why. So not even Tao Lords dare to step past this point, he thought. Moments ago, the Tao Lords had mentioned a third tribulation. Obviously, the different areas he had entered every 3 years were the tribulations these people were referring to. The first tribulation was tenfold, the second tribulation was 20-fold, and the third tribulation was 50-fold. Could it be that this fourth tribulation is 100-fold? Even as Meng Hao stood there pondering the situation, the Tao Lord who had asked him about his identity earlier opened his eyes. The fourth tribulation increases the pressure by 100-fold, he said. You need to be careful, kid. I don't know how you got here, but if you step in there without having a 4 essences cultivation base, you'll almost certainly be killed. Meng Hao turned and clasped hands in thanks to the Tao Lord. Then he turned back, took a deep breath, and to the shock of the four Tao Lords took a step forward. Are you looking to die? That was what all four of the shocked Tao Lords were thinking as Meng Hao started to walk. Rumbling sounds simultaneously echoed out. Almost instantly, his legs were shredded to pieces. Half of his body was destroyed. His arms burst into a mist of blood, and in the blink of an eye, the rest of his body was shredded to pieces by the 100-fold pressure. Only his head remained within the blood mist, as well as 108 soul lamps. 3 of those lamps were lit, and the rest were extinguished. Meng Hao only had his head left, but he roared nonetheless, and blue veins popped out on his skin. Then, his soul lamps began to vibrate, and then one of the remaining 3 suddenly went dark. After the lamp was extinguished, the blood mist which had exploded out began to form back together into a body. Although it was covered with wounds, Meng Hao managed to take a breath, then cough up a mouthful of blood as he fell to the ground. The 100-fold pressure continued to crush down onto him as he struggled up into a cross-legged position. Then he closed his eyes, rotating his cultivation base and circulating the life force which had come from extinguishing the soul lamp as he fought back against the pressure. Impossible! The four Tao Lords on the other side all stood up, faces covered with expressions of disbelief. All of them were panting, and their eyes were as wide as saucers. He's actually holding up. Only 4 essences cultivators can enter the fourth tribulation. Not even we can step in there. I remember 3 years ago when Tao Lord Flamefear from the 7th sect walked in and was killed instantly. Their minds were reeling as they stared at Meng Hao. A moment later, one of them suddenly whispered, "Just now, was I just seeing things, or did he have 108 soul lamps?" The other 3 gasped. Moments ago, they had been so preoccupied with the fact that Meng Hao actually took a step forward that they hadn't paid much attention to his soul lamps. Now that they thought back, they couldn't help but exchange astonished glances. When did someone inhuman like this appear in the sect? I noticed that he only had 2 lit soul lamps. If he actually extinguishes those final 2, then how powerful will he be? With each moment that went by, the men were more and more shaken. A few days later, the group of 4 looked on with mixed emotions as Meng Hao opened his eyes. He took a deep breath, and then also slowly rose to his feet. It was difficult to do, but after he finished the movement, he gritted his teeth and began to walk forward, completely ignoring the 4 Tao Lords. As he proceeded along, he got farther and farther away, until he disappeared from view. The Tao Lords could do nothing but sit there in silence, completely shaken by the fact that Meng Hao was walking through the tribulation that they themselves could not even enter. Only 2 soul lamps left, Meng Hao thought. The final 2. His vision was swimming, and his breath came in ragged pants as he proceeded along with great difficulty. After those 2 soul lamps, I can step into the Tao realm. In that moment, I will be able to form my essence, and use its power to begin completing the 9th hex. That is when I will see if my speculations are correct. After forming the outline of the first sealing mark of the 9th hex all those years ago on the vast expanse shrine, he had begun to speculate about a certain matter. He had the feeling that this clone of his would actually only be able to complete 1 sealing mark in his single lifetime. Most likely, he wouldn't be able to complete even 2, let alone 9. The Seal the Heavens hex was simply far too powerful and majestic. It was a hexing magic that, realistically speaking, shouldn't even be able to exist in the starry sky of the vast expanse. He took a deep breath as he trudged forward. Another 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. However, he still hadn't reached the 5th tribulation, the reason being that he was moving much more slowly than before and also had to rest frequently. It wasn't until 5 years later that Meng Hao reached the point where he could start jogging. Only then did he eventually catch sight of the border of the 5th tribulation. There he saw cultivators. There were 2 of them, seated cross-legged at almost the same position along the path. Astonishingly, both were 4 essences cultivators, and one of them, a middle-aged man in a black robe, was at the peak of 4 essences, just around the corner from 5 essences. The 2 men took note of Meng Hao's arrival, and one of them even looked at him with a hostile glare. "Someone's finally here," said the middle-aged man. "Ancient realm. Wow, an ancient realm cultivator who can pass through the 4th tribulation. Perfect for our plan." Obviously, any ancient realm cultivator who could make it here would obviously be a very important person in the sect, and most likely a future paragon. Because of that, he hesitated for a moment. In that moment of hesitation, Meng Hao had already jogged up and was approaching the border itself. The middle-aged man and the other 4 essences Tao realm experts exchanged a glance, and when they saw the decisiveness in each other's eyes, they gritted their teeth and cast all doubts aside. They looked over coldly at Meng Hao, who was now only about 1 step away from entering the 5th tribulation. The middle-aged man with the hostile expression didn't seem very anxious, nor did he seem to notice that Meng Hao apparently had the courage to immediately step into the next region. Only people with incredible power would be able to forgo resting and measuring up the next area. "Kid, why don't we make a deal?" the middle-aged man said, his voice cold. "Don't worry," said the other Tao realm expert. "The 2 of us don't wish you any harm. In fact, we want to offer you something incredibly helpful." Neither of them were paying much attention to where Meng Hao was standing. Both of them were of the opinion that virtually no one would ever do anything except rest here before taking another step. However, even as the words left their mouths, Meng Hao completely ignored them and stepped forward, his eyes glittering. "Wait. Are you trying to kill yourself?" The 2 Tao realm experts were completely shocked and rose to their feet anxiously. As for Meng Hao, a violent tremor ran through him. The pressure that was crushing down on him had rocketed directly to 150 times the original pressure. His body instantly collapsed, and not even his head remained intact. He transformed into a mist of blood, provoking grim expressions from the 2 Tao realm experts. They had been waiting a long time for someone to come along and fall into their scheme. How could they ever have guessed that the person to show up would be a complete idiot? What a moron that kid is. He deserved to die a worse death than he did for stepping in there like that. Who cares if he dies or not? He screwed things up for us now. Damn it. However, their curses were suddenly cut short and their jaws dropped in shock. The blood mist that was Meng Hao was acting differently than similar situations they had seen in the past. Instead of dispersing, it began to form back together. It only took a moment for it to once again turn into the vague shape of a person. When they looked closer, they were shocked to find that 108 soul lamps could be seen within that figure. 2 of those soul lamps were lit, with the rest being extinguished. It was at this point that one of those 2 soul lamps suddenly winked out. As a result, the life force remaining in the blood mist caused it to begin to form together, even as the intense pressure weighed down. Apparently, some incredible power was forcing the blood mist back into the shape of a body. However, the intense pressure seemed to be interfering, as if the power of 1 extinguished soul lamp wasn't enough to complete the task. But then, the final soul lamp flickered, and then, to the disbelief of the two Tao realm experts, suddenly turned dark. In that moment, everything went completely silent. Then, a heaven-shaking, earth-shattering blast of energy shot out from the blood mist, sending the two Tao realm experts staggering backward in shock.